What if I told you that Elijah's greatest miracle wasn't fire raining from the sky, but a desperate prayer whispered in the silence of his darkest hour? What if his most glorious triumph over 450 false prophets led straight into his deepest defeat? Picture the fire suddenly tearing through the heavens. The crowd screams, false prophets collapse to the ground, and the people shout, "The Lord has won." That day the nation saw power beyond imagination. But here's what you're not told. Immediately after that miracle, Elijah felt hollow, crushed by despair so heavy that even in his strongest moment, he begged God to take his life. When we think of Elijah, we imagine miracles, flames from heaven, the dead brought back to life, the prophet who stood unshaken before kings. But that is only the surface of his story. Hidden in the shadows is another truth, the weariness after victory, the emptiness after glory. A moment when even a prophet collapses beneath a desert tree and whispers through tears, "Enough, I can't go on." In this video, we will lift the curtain. You will meet an Elijah you've likely never heard about, a man whose struggles mirror our own. Not just a distant hero, but a reflection of your battles, your doubts, your silent prayers. Have you ever stood at the peak of success, only to tumble into emptiness the next moment? Have you felt loneliness, boredom, or despair right after your greatest achievement? Share your answer in the comments. Yes, I have, or no, never. Because this is not only Elijah's fight, it is the story of us all. So stay with us until the end. You may find your own journey hidden within Elijah's victories and defeats, and perhaps along the way, discover answers you never expected. After this story, you may never look at your greatest battles the same way again. Before we begin, please subscribe to our channel to support the making of these videos and give this video a like to help us reach more people. Let's walk this journey together. Now let's step back in time. It is the 9th century BC. The sun-baked land lies dry, the wells cracked and empty. The skies have been closed for 3 long years. After the golden age of Solomon, Israel is plunging into spiritual ruin. On the throne sits Ahab, one of Israel's most corrupt kings, but the true shadow falls beside him. Jezebel, princess of Sidon, high priestess of Baal. By her command, God's prophets are slaughtered, and innocent blood stains the ground. The people bow to idols, their hope slipping away. And from the forgotten hills of Gilead, a voice rises. His name is Elijah. Yahweh is my God. Only the howling wind, the rush of water, and the beating of ravens' wings. In the midst of these sounds, Elijah began to confront the deepest fears of his soul. What if God leaves me here forever? He must have wondered. That question is one of the cruelest whispers of loneliness. Yet each morning, the dark wings descending from the sky reminded him of the truth. Even in the most barren valley, God does not abandon you. Maybe you've lived through such a season yourself, when everyone seems to turn away, when you feel invisible even in a crowded room. In those moments, even the smallest sign can remind you that God has not forgotten you. A kind word from a friend, a smile from a stranger, a meeting that seems accidental but carries the weight of eternity. Small things, yet carrying messages greater than themselves. But then, one day the brook began to dry. The sound of running water faded, and the land's thirst could no longer be hidden. As Elijah watched the spring shrinking before his eyes, a question filled his heart. God brought me here, but where will he lead me now? It wasn't just physical thirst. Sometimes God allows our familiar streams to dry up so our eyes turn to a new path. For Elijah, a new trial and a new journey were about to begin. When the last drop vanished from the riverbed, silence took on a new meaning. No more water splashing, no more ravens' wings overhead, only emptiness. And in that emptiness, Elijah understood God was not merely hiding him, he was guiding him. Every ending was the seed of a new beginning. In those quiet days by the brook of Chariot, Elijah learned to search the depths of his own heart. Each morning he opened his eyes and lifted them to the heavens, remembering God's faithfulness. Each night, lying beneath the stars, he heard God's breath in the silence. These days shaped him, not just into a prophet, but into a servant who touched God's heart. Have you ever experienced something like this, when everything seems to collapse, but deep inside a whisper remains? Perhaps God is quietly training you in that moment. Share in the comments, how do you think God trains us in silence? The story of Elijah teaches us, silence is not emptiness, but an invitation. Waiting is not delay, but preparation. And solitude is not abandonment, but a training ground. That's why the brook Chariot was more than a refuge, it was a divine classroom. And the lessons Elijah learned there prepared him for the greatest battles of his life. Maybe you are in your own Chariot right now. Work has dried up, relationships have withered, hope feels thin. But remember, sometimes God closes our resources so we can turn fully to His. This story is not only about an ancient prophet, it mirrors our lives today. When we hear the name Elijah, most of us picture fire falling from heaven or the raising of the dead. Yet this part of his story takes us back to his most hidden, silent, and perhaps most transformative time, the days when God tucked him away in solitude. Because a warrior's strength is not found in the sword alone, but in the fire that forges it, and in the silence where it learns to wait. At a time when the sun burned fiercely and the ground split with cracks, the people of Israel cried out to heaven, but no answer came. At God's command, the skies closed and rain ceased. Hope dried up with the earth. In desperation, the people turned to Baal, offering their prayers to lifeless idols. Yet silence remained, and in that silence, God did something unexpected. Instead of sending his prophet to confront the people, he hid him. Elijah vanished from sight, but before God he became more visible than ever. God sent him to the brook Chariot to dwell in the shadows of solitude. His provision did not come from human hands, but from the wings of ravens. Morning and evening, they carried bread and meat to him. Each time they came, they carried a message as clear as the sunrise: I have not forgotten you. Picture it, a time when everyone has turned their eyes away from you, when no one remembers your name. Alone, hidden, far from the applause of crowds, would you accept such a calling? Could you bear to be unseen for God's sake? Write your thoughts in the comments. Yes, I would be willing to hide for God, or no, I could not endure it. Because Elijah's trial is not only his, it is also ours. For Elijah, hiding was never punishment, it was preparation. Though people forgot him, God was shaping him. Silence became a classroom. Solitude became his teacher. No roar of crowds, no commands from kings, only the voice of God. For man does not live by his own strength, but by the word of the Lord. When Elijah entered the city, he saw hunger everywhere. Children weakened before their mothers' eyes. Families scraped the earth for food. And in that desperate scene, God whispered to his heart, I have commanded a widow there to feed you. Elijah approached in wonder. A widow stood at the doorway, gathering a few dry sticks. Hunger had carved lines into her face. Her child clung weakly at her side. Elijah called out, Bring me some water. She hesitated, but turned to fetch it. Then he asked again, Bring me a piece of bread. Her reply was heavy with despair. I swear by the living God, I have no bread, only a handful of flour and a little oil. My son and I will eat them, and then we will die. That day, Elijah stood at a crossroads: remain by the dry brook and fade into nothing, or trust God and step into the unknown. And this is where the question turns to us. When God hides you, is it only about you, or could it be preparation for someone else's salvation? Share your thoughts below, because sometimes our loneliness becomes the seed of hope for others. Elijah took the step. Behind him lay a lifeless stream. Before him stretched the mystery of God's plan. Each stride carried him deeper into the unknown, yet his heart clung to one truth: man does not live by his own strength, but by the word of God. In that hidden place, Elijah's solitude became training, his silence became strength. Like a seed buried in darkness, unseen, unheard, forgotten, yet when the appointed time comes, the seed bursts forth, and even the mountains tremble. So it was with Elijah. His invisibility was not weakness, it was power God stored away until the moment of revelation. And there, in the silence of Chariot, Elijah learned to search his own heart. Each morning he lifted his eyes to the sky and remembered God's faithfulness. Each night under the stars, he heard God's breath in the stillness. This shaping did not merely make him a prophet, it made him a servant who touched the very heart of God. Have you ever walked through such a season, when it seemed like everything was ending, yet in the stillness you heard a whisper? Perhaps God was training you in secret. Share in the comments, how do you think God trains us in silence? The story of Elijah reminds us of a powerful truth. Silence is not emptiness, it is an invitation. Waiting is not delay, it is preparation. And solitude is not abandonment, it is training ground for the soul. That is why the brook of Chariot was more than just a hiding place. It became a divine classroom in the hands of God. The lessons Elijah learned there prepared him for the greatest battles of his life. Perhaps you are walking through your own Chariot right now. Work has dried up, relationships have faded, hope feels distant. But remember this, sometimes God closes the door to our resources so we can lean fully on His. That is why this story is not just about an ancient prophet, it's also about you. When Elijah left the dry bed of Chariot, he carried both fear and hope in his heart. God directed him toward Zarephath, a city beyond Israel's borders in a foreign land. Because sometimes God's plan stretches past our boundaries, reminding us that His will is not limited by human lines. The road was long, the sun blazed, questions echoed in his soul. Why Zarephath? Who will meet me there? How can I survive in a strange land? Yet with every step the unseen hand of God led him forward, and Elijah remembered what Chariot had already taught him, trust in God's provision. Now think about this. What small step can you take when you feel like you've reached the end? Share it in the comments with small step, because so often miracles begin with something as simple as a handful of flour. In that widow's home, Elijah found a quiet rhythm. Each morning, a hand reached into the jar. Each evening, the pot simmered with soup. The miracle didn't arrive with fanfare, it unfolded in simplicity. And with each repetition, a new truth became clear. God multiplies blessings through faithfulness, not through show. Every time the woman shared, her fear shrank and her faith grew. At that table, heaven touched earth. Her desperation met Elijah's trust in God's word. This was not just a meeting of a prophet and a widow. It was the unveiling of God's plan in the middle of human weakness. Now let me ask you, would you share your last meal or save it for your child? Write in the comments, I would share or I would keep. Because real faith is tested not in times of abundance, but in times of scarcity. To the woman, Elijah gave this promise, do not be afraid. For this is what the Lord says, the jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry, until the day the Lord sends rain. It was a bridge between hope and surrender, and when she shared what little she had, she placed her life and her son's future into the hands of God, and then the miracle happened. The flour in her jar never ran out, and the oil never ran dry. Each day their table held just a little more than expected. But this was more than bread and oil. It was the miracle of trust, the journey from despair into faith. Maybe you faced such a moment too, when you had almost nothing, yet fear kept you from sharing. But remember, God can turn even our smallest offerings into endless blessings. Which is harder, trusting in God or relying only on your own strength? Share your thoughts in the comments. As the days went by, hope filled the small house in Zarephath. Yet one day, the woman's son grew sick, and his breath slipped away. Her cry pierced the heavens, "Man of God, did you come to remind me of my sin and take my son's life?" Her grief spilled over as anger. Elijah gathered the boy in his arms, carried him upstairs and cried out to God, "Lord, have you brought sorrow upon this widow? Why take her son? Please let his soul return to him." Elijah stretched himself over the child 3 times, pleading with all his heart. And then heaven's gates opened, the breath of life returned, and the boy rose again. Elijah carried him back to his mother. Tears streamed down her face as she whispered, "Now I know you are a man of God, and that His word in your mouth is true." This was more than a child restored. It was God's power breaking through even the walls of death. For Elijah, it was a reminder. He was only the messenger. God held the power. Through the narrow streets of Zarephath, the news spread like fire. The boy who lay still yesterday was running today, laughing in his mother's arms. Neighbors peeked out, some doubting, others in awe. Yet the greatest change was in the mother's eyes. The same eyes that once said, "We will eat our last meal and die," now shone with the light of a new dawn. For in famine, God had multiplied not only oil and flour, but hope itself. Do we not see the same in our own lives? Bank accounts running dry, strength fading, breath growing short. How often do we say, "This is the end"? But perhaps what we call the end, God calls the beginning. When Elijah finally departed, it was more than a guest leaving a home. It was the farewell of 2 hearts that had met in the same God. Because true friendship is woven from shared bread and shared tears. Maybe there are houses of Zarephath in your life too, doors that opened unexpectedly, hands you never met praying for you. Send them a message today or make a call. Share in the comments, "My house of Zarephath is..." For gratitude is the invisible oil that keeps faith burning bright. Elijah set out with a house full of blessings behind him and the steepest slope of uncertainty before him. His steps were not heavy, for his heart was light. He had come to understand this, what God shapes in the kitchen of a humble home, He prepares to reveal on the mountaintop. That is why the path to Carmel truly begins at the narrow doorway of Zarephath. Now the story moves toward a scene that will speak in the language of fire. On that barren square where idols stand silent and prayers strain for an answer, one man will appear alone. But he will not be alone. The silence of Chariot and the blessing of Zarephath will walk with him to the summit. There the heavens themselves will declare who is God. And this time we will not be distant spectators. We will be summoned to confront the idols hidden in our own hearts. At the close of the second day, neighbors knocked at the door. "Do you still have flour?" The woman smiled as she opened it. The blessing never shrank with sharing. It grew wider and deeper. Faith, when lived out, becomes news worth telling. Yet life in that house was not without its shadows. The joy of a resurrection carried a new weight. At night Elijah would climb to the roof, praying in silence, eyes fixed on the stars, ears tuned to the familiar whisper. He knew the lessons of this town were laying the foundation for the battle ahead. The trust he had learned through bread and oil would soon be tested by fire and water. "Lord, you didn't bring me here only for bread," he may have murmured. "You have trained me in humility here." For unless a prophet remembers, even in a palace, what he learned in a widow's kitchen, his voice loses its power. The cry Elijah would soon thunder on Mount Carmel was carried in the quiet prayers he whispered on Zarephath's rooftop, and the woman too was transformed. The hands that trembled with fear on the first day now caressed her neighbor's children and stirred the shared pot. "The word of the Lord is true," she thought. "If he multiplies bread, he multiplies hope." Each time she saw her son awake and breathing, the same phrase echoed in her heart: "Life is in God's hands." The story of Zarephath is more than a lesson in survival. It is theology written on the heart. God sometimes sends ravens to strip away our pride. He leads us into foreign lands to dismantle our prejudices. He teaches us through the parable of the last morsel to confront our fears. Only then are we ready for the stage of Carmel. So ask yourself, how is God refining your pride today? Name the person, the situation, the place. This is my Zarephath classroom. Sharing it may be the very answer someone else is waiting for. One day the wind shifted. There was movement in the distance. Whispers carried on the tongues of caravans bound for the marketplace. In Israel, there was talk of a meeting on the mountain. Prophets and kings would gather at a single peak. When Elijah heard these rumors, he trembled not with fear, but with the shiver of a heart that knew the call was near. For faith is often prepared in the kitchen, but it is revealed on the mountain. That night, as the lamp's flame flickered softly in the house, Elijah moved toward the window. The town lay in deep silence. On the horizon, a faint glow rose, like the promise of a dawn not yet arrived. "The time is near," he whispered. "The fire of the Lord will reveal the truth hidden beneath man's lies." But it was not only the lies of idols. It was also that deceitful voice within the human heart, the voice that trusts its own strength and forgets God. That voice, tested by loneliness at Chariot and by need in Zarephath, would meet its judgment on the mountain. At dawn, the widow walked him to the door. Gratitude filled her eyes, and a trembling prayer rested on her lips. "May the word of the Lord be with you," she said. To all watching this video, let me ask you to answer in just 2 words in the comments. "The Lord is God." For that was the cry of the people that day, and we can proclaim the same faith once again today. When fire fell from heaven, the people's hearts trembled. "The Lord is God," they shouted in one voice. But the story did not end there. After the triumph on Mount Carmel came a new storm, Queen Jezebel's fury. Elijah's loneliest moments and his desperate flight after victory await us in the next chapter. There, hidden in God's gentle whisper, lies a greater lesson. For the journey did not end with fire, it would continue into the silence of the desert. From that day, hope took root once more in the quiet streets of Zarephath. News spread of the miracle in the widow's house. People realized God's word was not only for Israel, but for the nations beyond. It was one of the first signs of his universal mercy. Each day Elijah remained there. His understanding of God's faithfulness grew. In the morning there was always flour in the jar. At night there was oil still left. These small miracles became daily reminders of fresh grace. Sometimes the greatest wonders are hidden in simple, repeated acts of faithfulness. So what do you believe? Are miracles rare, extraordinary events, or small signs woven into the fabric of every day? Share your thoughts in the comments. For sometimes, even a breath, a piece of bread, or a single drop of oil is the strongest proof of God's presence. The days in Zarephath became more than days of survival. They became days of faith for an entire city. Elijah's name came to carry the weight of God's power, not only in Israel but also among distant peoples. When the crowd gathered on Mount Carmel, the silence was heavy. On one side stood hundreds of Baal's prophets, on the other Elijah alone, yet he was not truly alone. The silence of Chariot and the miracles of Zarephath were with him. Elijah stood tall and cried out, "How long will you waver between two choices? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, then follow him." The people stood silent. No one dared reply. Elijah commanded that 2 altars be prepared. From morning until noon, Baal's prophets cried out to their idols, cutting themselves, collapsing in frenzy. But not a spark fell from the sky. The people saw the silence of false gods with their own eyes. Then Elijah called the people close. He took 12 stones and built an altar for the Lord. He laid wood upon it, placed the sacrifice and poured water over it again and again until it ran into the trench below. The people stood in awe, watching. Elijah lifted his hands toward heaven and cried out, "O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac and Israel, let it be known today that you alone are God and that I am your servant. Turn the hearts of the people back to you this very day." And the moment his prayer ended, fire fell from heaven. It devoured the wood, the sacrifice, the stones, even the water in the trench. The crowd dropped to the ground, overwhelmed, and shouted with one voice, "The Lord, he is God! The Lord, he is God!" Picture that moment, the fire of the Lord blazing against the silence of lifeless idols. Ask yourself, what idol remains silent in your heart today? What prayer of yours still waits for fire from heaven? Share it in the comments. My Carmel, perhaps your testimony will ignite the faith of someone else. Elijah's triumph on Mount Carmel was more than a miracle, it was a summons. Today we too stand at the fork of 2 roads. The world parades its false gods before us. Power, money, fame, yet only the Lord responds. Which path will you choose? Those were dark days. A time when people looked up to the sky and found no rain, when the earth split open with thirst, when hope seemed to vanish. The tyranny of kings, the pull of idols, and the turning of hearts away from God had left the land like a desert. Humanity was lost in the silence of the heavens. In that moment, God called a man, Elijah. He was no ordinary man, yet he felt ordinary. His strength did not come from himself, but from the whisper of God. That quiet call, echoing through the mountains, prepared him to confront a nation alone. But this battle was not only against kings and false prophets, it was also against his own fears and his solitude. Have you ever felt like that? Alone in a crowd, wondering if your prayers are even reaching heaven? Elijah knew that feeling. His story carries not only miracles, but also the struggles of the human heart. When Elijah walked into King Ahab's palace, his voice struck like thunder. "There will be no rain in this land until the word of God returns." To declare such words before a king, it demanded not just faith, but a fearless heart. Yet this was only the beginning. Sometimes when you speak with courage, you find yourself standing alone. Has that ever happened to you? Times when truth left you isolated, when justice made you a target of ridicule. In such moments, Elijah's story shines like a beacon. If you've known that feeling, share it in the comments. When have you stood alone, yet refused to stop speaking the truth? God led Elijah to the valley of Chariot. There, by dried-up streams, he was fed by ravens carrying bread and meat. A miracle beyond reason, provision in a barren place. That is the heart of faith, that even in the most hopeless places, God's unseen hand sustains life. Later, fire came down and burned not only the altar, but also the hearts of the people, because God had broken the silence. Perhaps you need that fire today. If so, write in the comments, "The Lord is my God." When Elijah drenched the altar in water, the crowd whispered, "Who can set fire to wet wood?" The stones of Carmel were cool, the air heavy with tension, yet Elijah's thoughts were elsewhere, back in Chariot, for there, in hidden silence, his heart had been forged. A man does not fear wet wood when the fire already burns within, and yes, we will speak of that fire in a moment. But first, remember where its spark began, in a humble kitchen in Zarephath. So let me ask you again, have you ever felt like you were in a desert, like all was lost, like hope had slipped away, like you were utterly alone? Then remember this, God can feed you even through ravens. If you believe it, like this video and let someone else see it. Because perhaps your simple act of faith could light hope in someone else's heart. Days went by, yet the drought did not end. The ground grew harder, and hearts grew colder. Then God led Elijah to Zarephath, to the home of a widow. In her house, a simple jar of flour and a jug of oil became an endless source of blessing. But the true test came when her only son died. With tears streaming down her face, the widow clung to Elijah and cried, "Has God brought my sin back to punish me?" Elijah carried the boy upstairs. Lifting his hands toward heaven, he prayed with all his heart, "Lord, give this child back his life." And God heard him. The child's chest rose again, breath returned, and in that small room, death itself was defeated. Hope lived once more. We ask the same question, don't we? Is God punishing me? Have you ever whispered that in the middle of loss, pain, or struggle? Elijah's prayer is a sign for you as well. God brings hope even beyond death. If you believe this, write in the comments, "My hope is in God." Your words may not only be an answer to your own prayer, but to someone else's too. Years of drought had drained the people's faith. Then God called Elijah to a great showdown. Alone on Mount Carmel, he stood against hundreds of prophets of Baal. That day, not only the heavens would answer by fire, hearts would be tested as well. Because God is never silent. As the people gathered, Elijah called out, "How long will you hesitate between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him." The crowd stood silent. They, like you, had to decide. And maybe you, watching this now, feel the same question pressing on you. How long will you stand between two paths? Elijah rebuilt the altar. He set the stones, arranged the wood, and placed the sacrifice. Then he did something unthinkable. He drenched the altar with water. He poured so much that the trench around it overflowed. The people stared in disbelief. What God could consume a sacrifice soaked in water? All eyes turned to Elijah. He raised his hands to heaven and cried out, "O God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God." The crowd held its breath. Then fire fell from heaven. Flames devoured not only the sacrifice, but the stones, the wood, even the water itself. The people fell to the ground and shouted as one, "The Lord is God." And in that moment the heart of a nation was changed forever. "Man of God," she cried, "have you come to remind me of my sin?" This was not an accusation. It was a wound, raw and aching, caught between faith and fear. Elijah gathered the child in his arms and carried him upward. He did not speak many words. His heart did the pleading. "O Lord my God, please, return this life." Even the shadow on the wall seemed to pause, holding its breath. And then the miracle did not arrive with thunder, but with silence. The small chest rose. The air shifted. Below, a mother's tears fell, mingling with gratitude. Sometimes our prayers sound like that. When words fail, only two remain. God, please, have you ever reached that point? Write in the comments, yes or not yet. Then add one line, what did God show you in that moment? In Zarephath, miracles did not burst forth in noise, but grew slowly, in daily faithfulness. Each time the woman lifted the lid of the jar, she found herself whispering, "There is more today." A simple phrase, yet profound, diminishing fear, magnifying gratitude. Every morning in that small kitchen, Elijah listened to the language of enough. A heart that stops craving too much learns to thank God for enough. And it is there, in that space, that God multiplies. Perhaps you have stood at that threshold. The bank account grows thin, yet two plates still remain on the table. Some days the heart sighs, "Why so little?" On other days, it dares to say, "Nevertheless there is." Which words have you spoken more often? Write them in the comments, either "why so little" or "nevertheless there is." Then add one short reason, because your testimony may unlock another person's prayer. Zarephath was not only a lesson in blessing, it was a lesson in crossing boundaries. Elijah stayed in the home of a widow, in a land outside Israel. It was a quiet breaking of barriers, a dissolving of prejudice. Sometimes God writes our lessons not in our own homes, but on someone else's threshold. Elijah learned it here. The mission is sacred, even when borders shift. Unseen hands open unseen doors. Faith does not always persuade through thunder. Sometimes it speaks by persistence. A handful of flour left at the bottom of the jar, a final drop from the jug, each one a quiet answer to the question, has God forgotten? The woman who once said, "Our last meal," soon learned to say, "There is still today." Trust grew shorter and stronger, like the words she spoke. Perhaps the soul is healed more by brief thanksgivings than by long explanations. What is the small miracle in your home? Write it in one word: work, health, family, friendship, provision. In which of these did you learn the language of enough? Leave one word in the comments and add one short sentence with it. That small sentence may become a spark in someone else's heart. At night, Elijah stood on the roof, listening to the cool wind brush against the walls. He whispered, "In Chariot, you taught me to hide. Here, you taught me to share. You will reveal fire on the mountain, but you first breathed it into this little kitchen." He reminded himself, not vanity, but loyalty, not noise, but endurance. A prophet quietly needs today what he will one day proclaim aloud. One afternoon, a child's laughter filled the kitchen. Its rhythm danced with the bubbling pot, while the ceiling carried away the steam of old fears. Neighbors gathered at the door, not out of curiosity, but with eyes hungry for hope. When the woman placed a piece of bread in a waiting hand, the supply did not shrink enough, grew wider. True abundance is not measured by having more, but by trusting with less. Because less, when shared, always carries faith. Which is harder, do you think, waiting or sharing? Write one word in the comments and add a single sentence why. Perhaps your sentence will light a spark in someone else's home. But then the test came. The child grew sick. The dwarf of sorrow never left the room, and the air grew heavy. Yesterday's laughter was replaced by a fragile breath. The woman's eyes searched the sky for the same answer she once sought in an empty jar of flour. Because sometimes God does not shake the earth with thunder. Sometimes he lifts us with a quiet touch. Maybe that's what you need too, a quiet touch. Not a great victory, but a small piece of bread, a message, a song, the gentle hand of a friend on your shoulder. In such moments God may be whispering, and if you felt this, write in the comments, I felt it too. Your testimony might be the missing link in someone else's chain of hope. Elijah journeyed 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he entered a cave. God was not in the thunder. He was not in the storm. He was not in the fire, but in a whisper, and that whisper held the power to raise a heart to its feet again. You too may be waiting for a great sign, but maybe God is already speaking in a small whisper. Have you thought about that? Ask yourself, in what voice have I heard God? And share it in the comments. Did you hear him more in the storm or in the silence? Your answer may become the way forward for someone else. God gave Elijah a new mission to find Elisha and pass on his mantle. In that moment, a prophet learns something vital. Our journey is not measured by personal victories, but by the legacy we leave behind. When Elijah cast his mantle over Elisha, it wasn't just a cloak he gave. It was the call of God, the weight of a mission, and the continuation of a story. So let me ask you, what legacy do you want to leave? To your children, to your friends, to your community? Write one word in the comments: faith, hope, courage, or any word that speaks to you. Because the word you choose may become the answer to someone else's prayer. Elijah's story began with fire from heaven and ended with a whisper. People feared, stumbled and prayed, but God never left. Sometimes he came with fire, sometimes with bread, sometimes with a quiet whisper. And today, perhaps he is working the same way in your life. As this chapter closes, the next one will bring Elijah's ascension, the moment when fiery chariots descend. But remember this, before every great miracle, there is always a quiet whisper. Which whisper did you hear today? The stone walls of Zarephath were no longer rumor but living testimony, a home that declared, yesterday it was empty, today it is full, a child that cried, yesterday silent, today alive. And in Elijah's heart one truth grew clear: Yahweh provides. That truth would fuel the prayer on Mount Carmel, because the fire on the mountain was born out of faith in the kitchen. So let's return to that prayer over the drenched wood. Yes, soon we will see fire, but don't forget, behind the great miracles lies the faithfulness of small hidden rooms. And maybe your greatest prayer begins today with a small word of gratitude whispered in your own kitchen. Now choose one of these two words and write it in the comments, enough or more. Then explain your choice in one sentence. Your voice may echo in the whispers we'll hear in the next chapter. The fire that fell from heaven on Mount Carmel was more than a spectacle. It was the turning of a nation's heart. As the people fell to the ground and cried, "The Lord, He is God," heavy clouds rolled across the sky, and the long-awaited rain began to fall. But every triumph carries a shadow, for after the fire, storms often follow. After the miracle on Mount Carmel, Elijah ran to King Ahab and declared, "Rain is coming." At first, only a tiny cloud appeared on the horizon, no bigger than a hand. But soon the sky grew black, thunder rolled, lightning split the heavens, and the rain poured down in torrents. God had spoken through both fire and water. That day, the people saw that the Lord alone held the power to break the drought and quench the thirst of the land. But after a day of wonders, Elijah's own life fell into shadow. Word reached Queen Jezebel, and from her furious lips came a deadly vow: "By this time tomorrow, if I haven't taken your life, may the gods do the worst to me." Her threat struck Elijah's heart like a blade. The prophet who had called down fire from heaven now trembled at the thought of death. And here we see the most human moment in Elijah's story. Even after witnessing the fire of God, a heart can still be shaken by fear. Elijah fled into the wilderness. His body was weary, his spirit broken. He sat beneath the shade of a tree and whispered, "Lord, I've had enough. Take my life." Have you ever felt like that? A moment when all your strength is gone, when you feel you can't take another step. Perhaps after a great triumph, when the weight of exhaustion suddenly crashes down. Or in the quiet nights, when small disappointments pile up into something heavy. If so, you've stood in Elijah's place. Share it in the comments. I've been there. Because that kind of honesty can lift the weight from another soul. God did not answer Elijah's desperate prayer with fire from heaven. Instead, he sent an angel. The angel touched the sleeping man, placed fresh bread and cool water before him, and said, "Get up and eat." Elijah ate, drank, and fell back asleep. A second time, the angel returned. The journey ahead is long, and those words were hope itself to a weary heart. Ask yourself this: in what voice have you heard God? Share it in the comments. Was it in the storm or in the silence? Your answer may become a light for someone else. God gave Elijah a new mission, to find Elisha and pass on his mantle. In that moment, a prophet learns this truth: our journey is not measured by personal victories, but by the legacy we leave behind. When Elijah cast his mantle on Elisha, he gave more than a cloak. He handed over God's calling, God's mission, and the future of the story. What kind of legacy do you hope to leave behind? For your children, your friends, your community, share one word in the comments: faith, hope, courage, or any word that carries meaning for you. Because sometimes the single word you choose can shape another person's prayer. The fire that fell from heaven on Mount Carmel was more than a miracle. It was a turning point in the heart of a nation. As the people dropped to the ground and cried out, "The Lord is God," heavy clouds gathered. At last the first drops of long-awaited rain touched the earth. Yet moments of triumph often carry the shadow of coming storms. After Carmel, Elijah ran to King Ahab. "The rain is coming." At first only a small cloud appeared, no bigger than a hand. Soon the sky darkened, thunder cracked, and torrents of rain poured down. God had spoken in fire and in rain. That day the people witnessed the Lord's power to end both drought and despair. But after the glory of that day came the darkness of fear. Word reached Queen Jezebel. From her furious lips came the threat: "By this time tomorrow I will take your life." The same prophet who had called fire from heaven now trembled. The sword of fear cut deep into his heart. And here the story becomes achingly human. Even a prophet who has seen the fire of God can be shaken. Elijah fled into the desert, body weary, spirit drained. He collapsed beneath a tree and whispered, "Lord, I've had enough. Take my life." Have you ever felt that way? When every ounce of strength is gone, when victories fade and the weight of disappointment crushes you. If you've been there, you've walked the same road Elijah did. Write in the comments, "I've been there." Your honesty might lift someone else's burden. But God did not answer Elijah's despair with thunder or fire. Instead, he sent an angel, gently waking the exhausted prophet. The angel set before him bread and water. "Get up and eat," he said. Elijah ate, drank, and fell back asleep. Again the angel came. "You still have a long journey ahead." Simple words, yet they breathed hope into a broken heart. Because sometimes God restores us not through lightning, but through a quiet touch. Maybe that's what you need too. Not a grand miracle, but a gentle sign, a small piece of bread, a message, a song, a friend's hand on your shoulder. In those moments, God may be whispering to you. If you've ever felt that, write, "I felt it too." Because testimonies weave the chain of hope that holds us together. Elijah walked 40 days and nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he hid in a cave, and it wasn't in the thunder, nor in the storm, nor in the fire that God spoke. It was in a whisper that carried the strength to raise a weary heart. Maybe you're waiting for a sign so big it shakes the heavens. But what if God is already speaking to you in a whisper? Have you thought about that? Elijah's story began with fire from heaven and ended with a whisper. He feared, he stumbled, he prayed, yet God never left, sometimes with fire, sometimes with bread, sometimes with a whisper. And today, he may be speaking the same way into your life. As this chapter closes, the next will lead us to the breathtaking moment of Elijah's ascension, the arrival of the fiery chariots. But don't forget, before every great miracle comes a gentle whisper. Which whisper reached your heart today? Will you turn away from God's gift and sink into the shadows, or will you take the bread and rise with new strength? Night had fallen. A cold wind swept through the desert, and the sky glittered with stars, yet Elijah's heart was heavy with darkness. Not long ago, he had shaken the nation with the fire of God, announcing the return of the rain. But now Jezebel's threat pierced his heart like a dagger. He had seen miracles with his own eyes, yet the furious words of a queen drove him into the deepest valley of fear and exhaustion. Elijah fled. Step by weary step, he crossed the desert with a single cry in his heart. "It is enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." These were not the words of a prophet, but of a broken man. And maybe today, as you sit before this screen, you too have felt that same despair. Have there been times when you thought, "I can't go on"? If so, know this: you are not alone. The silence of the desert wrapped itself around him, echoing his hopelessness. With every step, it seemed as if hope was drifting farther away, while loneliness pressed harder on his shoulders. Even the memories of God's wonders no longer comforted him. The fire that had consumed Mount Carmel, the people bowing in awe, the rain that fell from heaven, all of it now felt like a distant dream. The only reality that remained was Jezebel's rage. Isn't that how life sometimes feels? Yesterday's victories fade, swallowed by the weight of today's struggles. Finally, Elijah collapsed beneath the shade of a tree. He longed not only to let his body rest, but to release his soul as well. On that thin edge between sleep and death, he closed his eyes. But God's plan was not to end the story here. An angel touched him gently and spoke, "Get up and eat." Before him lay warm bread and a jug of water. Bread and water of life, placed before a man who had asked for death. God's answer was not thunder, nor fire from the sky, but something simple, quiet and essential. Haven't you felt that too? When everything seemed lost, yet a small word, an unexpected kindness, a friend's hand reached out and pulled you back. That is how God often speaks, not in shouts but in whispers that carry life. So I ask you, has there been a moment when God's quiet whisper reached you just in time? Share your story in the comments. Your testimony might be the bread of hope that someone else desperately needs today. Elijah ate the bread and drank the water given to him by the angel. Perhaps as he took the first bite, he still felt a shadow of resistance. Perhaps despair still clung to him. Yet that simple piece of bread began to nourish more than his body. It began to heal his soul. This bread was not ordinary food, but a divine sign. And here is the same message for you, the one watching now. God has not forgotten you. You may be weary, but the Lord is preparing the strength to lift you up. The angel touched him a second time. "Get up and eat, for the journey ahead is long." These words were not only for Elijah, they are also for us. We too have a long road ahead, and often at the very start, we feel exhausted. Maybe you are at such a moment right now. Ask yourself, will you stop here, or will you keep going? Think of a single word that marks your journey. Kitchen, desk, midnight. Whatever it is, that place becomes sacred because of the faithfulness you learn there. Some days the wind may sting your face, on others the moonlight may soothe your heart. But in every season the truth remains, God is still walking with you. Sometimes the miracle comes as fire from heaven, other times it comes as the quiet end of weary steps. If this touches your heart, share this video with a friend who is tired. Perhaps today your message will be the angel's touch for them. As Elijah drew near to Horeb, the rocks loomed larger, the shadows grew longer. In the distance, the mouth of the cave appeared like a dark doorway. "He will speak here," Elijah whispered, not knowing who he was asking, but knowing who would answer. Sometimes silence is found not by standing still, but by walking. And as you walk, the words grow fewer, and the heart learns to listen. Remember, the choice is in your hands. If these words speak to you, like this video and subscribe, because no one walks this road alone. We are stronger together. And write in the comments, "I too rise and keep going." Perhaps your words will be the angel's touch for another soul. And so Elijah walked toward Mount Horeb. He was not alone. The stones crunched beneath his feet, despair pressed against his chest, yet the sky kept watch with the silent presence of God. This journey was not only the path of a prophet, it was the journey of every human soul moving from despair to hope. The path was long and hard, but at every step, an unseen strength from above carried him forward. Those steps could be your steps too, because Elijah's story is not just history, it is a mirror of your own spiritual journey. Today you are walking toward your own Horeb, and God has not left you alone on this path. If you feel it in your heart, write in the comments, "I too am walking to my Horeb." For this journey belongs not only to Elijah, but also to us. Know this, the way to Horeb is not only through sand, stone and long roads, it also runs through the deepest valleys of the human soul. Every rock Elijah stepped on with his weary feet reflects the wounds of our own hearts. Those stones can be our mistakes, our regrets, our losses, yet God's hand can turn even the hardest rock into a holy sign. Every step Elijah took reminds us, no matter how rough the path, the heavens are always above us. If you are carrying a heavy burden on your journey right now, let these words be an invitation. Don't stop, keep moving forward. God is calling you toward his Horeb, and maybe this moment is the very beginning of your resurrection. By day the sun burned his skin, by night the desert frost bit into his bones. Yet Elijah kept walking. He didn't count his steps. He moved forward with the strength of bread, the coolness of water, and the promise of something unseen. Sometimes a prophet does not walk with grand miracles, but with quiet obedience. A morsel, a sip, a step. Sometimes this is the rhythm of salvation. As the road stretched on, two voices wrestled in his mind. One was the voice of fear, run, hide, give up. The other was the whisper of hope. Keep going. Fear is real, but so is the call. Fear drains us. The call gives meaning to our weariness. Are you standing in this same tension? Write one word in the comments, let go or keep going, and share your reason in a single sentence. Perhaps your words will become a guide for someone else's heart. Elijah stumbled at times, even fell, but every time he fell, he remembered the bread. The Lesson of Loneliness by Chariot, the faithfulness in Zarephath's kitchen. Behind the great scenes stand the prayers whispered in hidden rooms, and we often learn to stand not before crowds, but in those unseen moments when only God is watching. Where is your little room? Maybe you too have been waiting for a great sign, but perhaps what God asks of you today is simpler. A morsel, a sip, a step. When you grow weary, remember this, and in the comments write, one more step. Let that phrase be a promise for you and a key for someone else. Then Elijah stopped. At the mouth of the cave, he pressed his palms to the cool stone. The shadow of Jezebel's threat still lingered within him, yet now he knew where the light behind that shadow came from. Tomorrow he would discover that God's voice was not in the storm, not in the quake, not in the fire, but in a sound unlike any other. But for today, the first lesson was complete. Exhaustion is not the end of the call, but the doorway to a new beginning. Do you believe God can open a new door in your life, even when you are most exhausted? If so, write "I believe" in the comments, and share this video so that someone else weighed down by weariness can be lifted up by this word. Elijah emerged from the cave with a different light on his face. The weariness was still there, but it was mingled with hope and strength. He had heard the whisper, he had answered God's question, and now he stood on the threshold of a new journey. When Elijah stepped out of the cave, he left behind more than shadows and stone. He laid down the weight of his fears. A new responsibility rested on his shoulders now. God had assured him that he was not alone, that a remnant of faithful ones still remained. This was a living sign of hope, because even when we think we are alone, God's hidden faithful are always near. If you've ever felt this way, write "I am not alone," because that one sentence can echo in another person's heart. Elijah's renewed strength was born from a whisper that came from God, not from thunder or chaos, but from stillness. And it teaches us this: when we make room for God in our silence, He creates new beginnings. Perhaps for you watching now, it's time to step out of your own cave. Maybe it's time to face the fears you've locked away for years. If these words stir something in you, join us, subscribe, and walk this journey together. Because this isn't just a story, it's a shared path we all walk. The cave was heavy with silence. Elijah leaned against the cold stone, his heart racing, his mind drowning in questions. Why me? Why am I so alone? Lord, have you abandoned me? His words echoed, not to the sky but against the cavern walls. Yet in that deep silence, God was preparing to speak. First came a fierce wind, tearing across the mountain, scattering rocks and dust. Elijah squinted into the storm, but the Lord was not in the wind. Then the ground shook, stones tumbling with the force of an earthquake. Elijah pressed his hands over his ears, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After that came fire, flames rising and consuming the horizon, yet still the Lord was not in the fire. And then a gentle whisper. In that whisper there was no fury, no noise, only peace. Elijah pulled his robe over his face and fell to his knees. For the Lord was in that soft, fragile voice. And sometimes we too wait for grand signs, fire from heaven, mountains shaking, miracles breaking into our lives. But often God comes in the quietest moments. Have you ever heard that subtle voice? Share one word in the comments, "I have heard," or "not yet." Your answer may become someone else's hope. That whisper lifted Elijah's weary soul. Fear still lingered, but darkness was no longer the only reality. Hope had entered the cave, and so even in your own despair, open your ears, for the Lord often speaks in silence. If this touches you, press like now, not just as a button, but as a way of saying, I want to hear that voice. Then came God's question, Elijah, what are you doing here? It wasn't a rebuke, but a question spoken in love. God already knew, but Elijah needed to speak his heart aloud, and so he confessed, I have tried so hard, Lord, your people have turned away. I am left alone, and now they want to take my life. His honesty was raw, his pain unhidden. Maybe God is asking you the same question today. What are you doing here? Could it be that you too are hiding behind fears, behind walls, behind silence? This is your moment to answer. Write in the comments, I am here. Sometimes healing begins with simply telling God where you are. God did not scold Elijah. He did not push him away. Instead, he gave him a new mission. Go back, continue your journey. You will call Elisha to walk in your place. You will anoint kings, and a new generation will rise. Elijah had been waiting for death, but God gave him the future. That is who God is. When we surrender at the edge of exhaustion, he opens the door to a new beginning. God gave Elijah not only comfort, but direction. He showed him the road, the gates, the names by which his plan would unfold. A king would rise in Aram, justice would return to Israel, and a new prophet would take Elijah's place. Elijah, once broken, was now being reshaped into the builder of a new era. Because often God begins healing by giving us responsibility. As Elijah stepped out of the cave, the wind brushed against his face. He pulled his mantle, the heavy time-worn robe, tight across his shoulders. It was no longer just clothing. It was a symbol, a calling, the weight of a mission. The mantle carried years of history, and now it was destined to rest on another heart. A question for you. When you feel the weight of a calling, what's your first instinct, to run or to carry it? Leave just one word in the comments, run or carry. Then explain in one sentence why. Your honesty might become the courage someone else needs. When Elijah came down to the plain, he saw a young man working in the fields, his shoulders strong and his gaze steady. It was Elisha, the son of Shaphat, guiding the plow through the soil. Without a word, Elijah approached and placed his mantle across the young man's shoulders. A simple cloak touched the ground, yet a destiny was lifted up. This is how the call often arrives, without words, but with a weight you cannot ignore. Elisha suddenly stood between two worlds, the comfort of his family table and the unknown path of God's calling. Elijah kept walking, but the young man cried out after him. The choice had to be made here and now. We too face crossroads like this, cling to what we know or risk everything for what lies ahead. If that question speaks to you, share this video with a friend. Perhaps it will guide them at their own crossroad. Elisha laid down the plow and did not look back. He sacrificed the oxen, shared the feast with his people, and then followed Elijah. It was a step from which there was no return. Sometimes saying yes to the call means burning the old bridges. Elisha no longer held a plow, but a mission, God's mission, and with Elijah's legacy beside him, it became the beginning of a new chapter. Elijah knew now that he was not alone. God had not only lifted him up again, but had given him a new generation to walk behind him. The lesson is clear. God's work is never meant for one person alone. Your journey is not just yours. Others will be strengthened by your steps. If this truth moves you, leave these words in the comments. There are those who come after me. Let this remind you to walk forward without looking back. Elijah's story began with fire, and it would end with fire. But this time, not the consuming fire on Mount Carmel, but the fire of a chariot from heaven. Before Elisha's eyes, Elijah was taken up in a storm of fire and glory. This was God's way of honoring his prophet, a heavenly inheritance that declared his faithfulness. Death did not claim Elijah. Instead, the ascension testified to God's unfailing promise. As Elisha watched, he cried out, my father, the chariots and horsemen of Israel." And when the mantle fell to the ground, he picked it up. In his hands it was no longer Elijah's alone. It was the sign of a new calling, a new generation. And so God's story passed on, from one life to another, from one generation to the next. This scene reminds us of something vital. Even if we don't ascend like Elijah, we still leave a legacy behind. We can pass down faith, hope, and love to those who follow. What kind of legacy do you want to leave? Write one word in the comments: faith, hope, or love, because your answer could plant the seed of someone else's journey. The story of Elijah is more than a prophet's tale. It is our story too. Fear, exhaustion, the whisper, the call, the legacy, all of it belongs to us as well. And like Elijah, even in God's silence, we can discover new beginnings and leave something eternal behind. As you hear this story today, maybe you sense your own calling. Perhaps the whisper you have long waited for has finally reached your heart. If so, take the step now. Like this video, subscribe and share a glimpse of your journey in the comments. Because none of us walks this road alone, we walk it together. And the story of Elijah does not end here. As he rose into the heavens in his fiery chariot, the door to eternity opened for us as well. This is not just history, it is a call still alive today. Listen to that call and keep walking, for there is still a long road ahead and a new generation after us. In the next chapter, we will witness how this legacy is carried forward into new generations and how Elisha rises to take his place. Elijah's mantle now becomes the sign of a new journey, one filled with purpose and promise. Prepare yourself, because this path will shine a light not only on what has been, but also on what is yet to come. The story is far from over. The deeper truth awaits you in the next chapter. Pour again, he commanded. A second time, water was poured. Again, he said. A third time, water cascaded until the ditch overflowed and the wood was drenched. The foothills of Mount Carmel were packed with people. They had gathered from every corner of Israel, holding their breath in anticipation. On one side stood 450 prophets of Baal, their garments bright, their prayers loud. On the other, a single man, Elijah. He had no army, no crowd to cheer him on. Yet he was not alone. With him stood an unseen power, the word of the Lord. The sun burned overhead, the air shimmering across the stones. Hunger and drought had worn the people down. Their eyes carried both anger and fragile hope. Children's tears mixed with the dust. Mothers stood silent. Fathers searched the crowd with helpless stares. In the middle of this scene, Elijah rose like a solitary figure. He lifted his voice, thundering over the silence. How long will you waver between two choices? If the Lord is God, follow him. If Baal is God, then follow him. His words echoed against the mountain, but the people said nothing. No applause, no protest, only silence, heavy and unbroken. That silence was the pulse of a nation torn in two. And now let me ask you, have you ever been caught between two paths, ignoring the truth you knew in your heart, just to follow the crowd? Share in the comments, I wavered or I chose, because this scene is not only about an ancient mountain, it's also a mirror of our own hearts. The prophets of Baal began first. From dawn until noon they cried out, throwing themselves to the ground, slashing their skin with sharp stones. Blood stained the earth, yet the heavens gave no reply. The crowd's hope slowly drained into despair. Their voices rose, but the sky remained silent. Elijah watched with a bitter smile. He did not mock, only waited in silence, a silence that revealed the emptiness of their cries. He knew that God himself would uncover the futility of false gods before all eyes. And isn't it the same today? We pour our time into technology, wealth, fame, but do they ever fill the emptiness within? What do you think are the false gods of our time? Write in the comments, the false god in my life, because the first step toward freedom is seeing the truth for what it is. When noon arrived, Elijah stepped forward and spoke with calm authority. Let the people come to me. Slowly the crowd gathered around. He picked up 12 stones, each one a symbol of Israel's tribes, and began to rebuild the altar of the Lord. One by one he set them in place, restoring what had been broken and forgotten. The people watched in silence, realizing this was more than stones being stacked. It was a nation being called back to life. When the altar stood complete, Elijah laid the wood and prepared the sacrifice. Then, to everyone's astonishment, he said, "Bring 4 large jars of water." At the height of a devastating drought, the people gasped. Still the water was brought, and jar after jar was poured over the sacrifice until it was drenched. An old man in the crowd lifted his trembling hands toward heaven and cried, "We may forget, but you never forget us, Lord." His words spread like a spark through the people. Whispers rose into a chorus, as though a single hymn was echoing from every voice. In that moment, it felt as if the nation itself had been reborn. Haven't we felt the same wonder? When we witness something miraculous, our doubts vanish. Yet once the moment passes, we slip back into old ways. Could forgetfulness be the greatest enemy of faith? Share in the comments. Do you find yourself saying, "I forget quickly," or "I try to remember"? Because Elijah's message is still alive today. Remember the true God. When fire fell from heaven after Elijah's prayer, it was more than victory, it was judgment. That day, the false gods were silent, and only the Lord's voice thundered. The prophets of Baal shrank back in fear. Their bright garments meant nothing, their chants faded into nothingness. In the eyes of the people, their power collapsed in an instant. Fathers held their children close. Mothers fell to their knees with tears streaming down. As the flames died down, one truth remained: the Lord is God. Everyone felt the weight of that reality. There was no denying it. Elijah's face glowed in the firelight. His strength came from God, not men, and now that strength stood as a witness before the entire nation. In the people's eyes, he saw both fear and faith, sparks of a new beginning. Imagine it, in the middle of a drought, when water was worth more than gold, trusting God enough to pour it out on an altar. Would you have done it? Write in the comments, "I would," or "I'd be afraid to," because faith becomes real when it dares to go beyond reason. The crowd stood breathless as Elijah lifted his hands to heaven. "O God of Abraham, Isaac and Israel," he prayed, "let it be known today that you are God and I am your servant." The sky grew heavy, clouds gathered, the wind began to rise, hearts pounded, every eye was fixed upward. The moment had come, a light flashed in the heavens, at first a spark, then a towering column of fire. Panic swept the crowd as cries filled the mountain. The people turned on the prophets of Baal. They begged for mercy, but no one listened. The deception was over. Truth had been revealed. Elijah watched, not with triumph but with solemn silence. This was not his victory, but the Lord's judgment. The false prophets were driven into the valley of Kishon, where their end came. Israel had witnessed a day they would never forget. As the sun sank beyond the horizon, only the smoke and the silence of Mount Carmel remained. Yet that silence was heavy with meaning. The false gods had fallen, and the glory of the true God was revealed. Deep within their hearts, the people carried the miracle they had seen. Where is faith tested most? In the roar of the crowd, or in the quiet of your heart? Share your thoughts in the comments, because the Battle of Mount Carmel is not just an ancient story, it continues in us today. Fire came down from heaven and consumed everything: the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, even the water in the trench. Flames reached high into the sky, and the people fell back in awe. Some collapsed to their knees, others covered their heads in fear. The fire of the Lord had fallen before all. And then one voice rose above the rest: "The Lord is God. The Lord is God." Soon the whole crowd cried out together. No longer divided, they were united by one truth, lifting one name in unison. The cries of the crowd echoed against the rocky slopes of the mountain. People fell to the ground, pressing their faces into the dust. Some lifted their hands to heaven through their tears, while others clutched their children, trembling in fear. No one could stand against the power of the Lord. Elijah's eyes were fixed on the heavens. Peace filled his heart, for the people had seen that he was not alone. This was more than a miracle. It was a seal upon the soul of a nation. The fire-lit sky was awakening Israel's forgotten faith. Some in the crowd shrank back in terror, while others edged closer to Elijah. The mockery that had filled their eyes only moments ago was gone, replaced by awe and reverence. Children pointed toward the sky, and mothers whispered to one another. Smoke still curled upward from the mountaintop, and the scent of scorched stone drifted through the valley. Everyone knew this was no ordinary sign. History itself seemed to be watching. Elijah drew a deep breath and cried out to the people, "You have seen it. The Lord is God. There is no other." His voice rang with authority, his face stern, yet compassion glimmered in his eyes. For in that moment, he had not only unmasked the lies of false gods, he had rekindled hope in the hearts of a desperate people. Would you want to be there, to witness a miracle with your own eyes, to see a crowd united in wonder at the same truth? Tell me in the comments. Would you write, "Yes, I would want to see it," or "No, true faith lives not in sight but in the heart"? For real faith is not only about seeing, it is about trusting even when you cannot. The prophets of Baal remained silent. Their faces were pale, their confidence gone. They knew their power had slipped away before the eyes of the people. Once their shouts had stirred the crowds, but now their voices were no more than broken whispers. Their silence was proof enough of the emptiness of their gods. Elijah stepped toward them. Every eye followed. A hush fell like a judgment across the mountain. All waited. What would he do? He advanced slowly, each step heavy with purpose. Determination shadowed his face, and the fire of God blazed in his eyes. The people held their breath. Elijah's command rang out, "Seize the prophets of the Lord's enemies. Do not let a single one escape." At once the crowd surged. The same people who had stood frozen now moved like an army. Panic gripped the prophets of Baal, but there was no escape. Screams, footsteps, and the roar of the multitude thundered across the mountainside. The sky was still veiled in smoke. The sun shone red through the haze, casting a blood-colored light over the scene. Elijah lifted his voice again. "Lord, today you have shown your power to your people. Cleanse us from false gods." And as the people cried out with him, the mountaintop became a stage of divine judgment. The crowd was silent, every eye fixed on Elijah. He drew in a deep breath and lifted his gaze to the empty sky. The horizon stretched wide and dry, not a single cloud in sight. Yet within his heart he heard the whisper of God. With firm conviction he spoke to the people. "The rain will come, the Lord will water this land again." Hope flickered on their faces. Some lifted their eyes to heaven, others knelt and opened their hands in prayer. Children glanced at one another and smiled. After years of desolation, the promise of life stirred once more. Have you ever heard such a promise? One you must trust in your heart before you see it with your eyes. Share in the comments, "Yes, I can believe," or "Not until I see it." Because true faith is not proven by fire falling from heaven, but by waiting for what is yet unseen. As the cries of the false prophets faded into the valley of Kishon, a deep stillness covered Mount Carmel. It was not just the end of a contest, but the echo of a lesson engraved in the soul of a nation. Men and women fell to the ground, tears soaking the dust. Some raised trembling hands to the sky, others wept on their knees. For all had witnessed the same truth. God had not forgotten his people. Elijah stood in their midst, alone yet unshaken. Smoke curled upward, merging with the fading light of the sun until the scene became like a sacred painting. The weight of that moment pressed into every heart, unforgettable. People embraced one another, whispering through trembling lips, "The Lord is God, the Lord is God, and what about you?" If you had seen such a miracle, how would it change you? Write in the comments, "My faith would grow stronger," or "I would still doubt." For faith does not begin with a miracle, it must be kept alive within the heart. When Elijah proclaimed God's victory, he looked upon the people. His eyes reflected both triumph and weariness. For the work of a prophet was not only to call down fire, but to call people back to God. Victory was not an ending, it was a burden of responsibility. A wind stirred at the foot of the mountain, dry branches rustled, and the stones still held the heat of fire. Elijah lifted his eyes once more and breathed deeply. He knew this was only the beginning. Greater trials, deeper whispers awaited him. Among the crowd, voices rose in wonder. A father clasped his son's hand and whispered, "Do you see? The Lord is still with us." Fear and hope mingled in the boy's eyes. A woman, tears streaming down her face, embraced her neighbor. "Now I know God has not abandoned us." Word spread quickly, passed from mouth to mouth, swelling like a prayer carried by the wind. Perhaps you too have lived such moments, when all seemed lost and suddenly a sign appeared. But how easily we forget. Tell me, when are miracles most precious? In the moment we see them, or in the times we remember them? Write in the comments. Seeing is enough, or remembering keeps it alive. Elijah listened as whispers spread across the mountain, and he prayed in silence. "Lord, seal their hearts. Let what they witness today not fade tomorrow." For he knew the frailty of people. Their eyes longed for wonders, but their hearts faltered quickly. The prophet's greatest battle was not to call down fire, it was to keep faith burning in their souls. Then from the crowd, a young man stepped forward. Awe still filled his eyes as his voice trembled. "Prophet, what happens now? Will the rain truly come?" The question pierced every heart, for the memory of 3 long years of drought still lingered like a wound. The miracle of fire on Mount Carmel was now crowned with another wonder, the blessing of rain. Elijah once again witnessed the faithfulness of God. As the rain poured harder, valleys flooded and streams surged with life. The earth, thirsty for so long, drank deeply, and a new light of hope shone in the people's eyes. Some lifted their hands to the heavens, others knelt in prayerful gratitude. Children splashed barefoot in the mud, while the elderly looked on with tears streaming down their faces. In that moment, everyone knew the Lord had kept his promise. King Ahab climbed into his chariot, ready to return to his palace. But the downpour was relentless. The wheels sank deep, the horses struggled to move. Then Elijah, filled with the strength of God, tightened his cloak around his waist and ran like the wind ahead of the king's chariot. Through the storm, a prophet was leading a king. Can you picture such a scene? A lone man, powerless by human standards, outrunning the king himself through the Spirit of God. What does this tell us? Share in the comments. God gives strength, or man has limits, because faith allows us to break past the limits of flesh. Elijah's feet pounded the muddy road, raindrops stinging his face. Behind him the people lagged, before him the path to the palace stretched long and rough. Yet in his heart, a single truth whispered, "The Lord is faithful, the Lord keeps his word." This race was not about speed, it was a living testimony of trust in God's promise. The storm raged, thunder rolled, lightning split the sky. The rain battered the stones of the mountain, as though heaven and earth together proclaimed the Lord's glory. Elijah's breath quickened, but faith burned steady in his eyes. To him this was no mere race. It was carrying the word of God, declaring his might even before kings. After calming the people, Elijah ascended the mountain once more. Each step was heavy, yet carried by prayer. The crowd watched from below, but no one dared stop him. This was now between prophet and God alone. At the summit, Elijah fell to his knees. He bent low, head between his legs, his whispers barely audible over the wind. His prayer echoed against the rocks of Mount Carmel. Only his servant stood by his side. Elijah lifted his head and said, "Go, look toward the sea. Tell me what you see." The young man ran, eyes straining toward the horizon, but the sea was still, the sky empty. He returned, "There is nothing." Elijah's voice was calm. "Go back, look again." The servant went again and again, saw nothing. He repeated the search 7 times, each time the same answer, nothing. The people waited. The sky gave no sign, yet Elijah's faith did not waver. He clung to God's promise. Ask yourself, after 7 times of disappointment, could you still wait with hope? Comment below, "Yes, I would have waited," or "No, I would have given up." Because faith is not giving up, even in the longest silence. At the 7th time, the servant's cry broke the air. "I see a small cloud, no bigger than a man's hand, rising from the sea." Elijah's heart leapt, his eyes lit with certainty, for God's word never fails. He turned quickly to his servant. "Run to Ahab, tell him to hurry to his chariot, and ride before the storm overtakes him." The servant hesitated. After all, it was only a tiny cloud. But to Elijah, it was the dawn of blessing. Moments later, the sky began to change. That small cloud swelled, darkened and spread until it covered the heavens. The wind roared, branches snapped, dust whirled in the air. The people lifted their faces upward, joy mingling with fear. At last, the rain they had long awaited was coming, poured out in abundance by the hand of God. Thunder rumbled, and lightning split the sky. Then came the first drop, and another, and another. In moments the heavens opened, and the rain fell in torrents. It streamed over the stones, poured into the valleys, and the thirsty earth drank it all in. People shouted, children danced, hands reached upward, some with tears of joy, others simply catching the drops in their palms. Sometimes all it takes is a small sign. Just a tiny cloud can revive hope. Have you ever experienced that? A small sign that felt like a great answer? Share it in the comments. Yes, I have, or no, I keep waiting. Because God often begins his greatest miracles with the smallest beginnings. As the rain came down in waves, voices rose in thanksgiving. Ahab's face was marked with both fear and wonder. Not long before, the king had mocked Elijah, but now he stood watching, unable to deny the power of the Lord moving like a storm. It was a lesson he would never forget, one not written on thrones or crowns, but in the hand of God himself. The rain did not stop. It drenched the valleys, filled the fields, and sent floods rushing through the land. The people took shelter in their homes, but their hearts carried something new, a hope reborn. For that day heaven had sent fire, and now heaven had sent rain. Israel had seen God's power in both. Which miracle would you choose, the fire of judgment or the rain of mercy? Tell us in the comments, because sometimes God teaches through fire, and sometimes he restores through rain. That day on Mount Carmel became a turning point. The people saw the silence of false gods and the undeniable strength of the Lord. Elijah's lonely battle had turned an entire nation's heart back to God. And that story is not just theirs, it speaks to us as well. Night fell, but the storm still echoed across the mountains. Valleys flooded, waters surged between rocks, and the land groaned under the weight of blessing. The people had gone home, but something lingered. Not only had fire fallen from the sky, but the faithfulness of God had been sealed by the rain. Elijah stood alone on the rocks. Cool rain struck his face, the wind tangled his hair, and his eyes searched the heavens. "Lord," he whispered, "you have lifted your people once more. You judged with fire, and you healed with rain." His prayer rose with the storm, carried by the roar of heaven. In the distance, Ahab's chariot wheels sank into the mud. The king was weary, but Elijah stood firm, unshaken, because his strength was not born of flesh, but of the Spirit of God. So let me ask you, what do you believe is God's greatest miracle? His fire that judges, his rain that shows mercy? Or is it that he gives both, fire and rain, judgment and grace, wrath and love, woven together in one divine story? As the night deepened, silence once again covered Mount Carmel. The rain slowed and stars broke through the clouds. Elijah dropped to his knees, offering a prayer of pure gratitude. "O Lord," he whispered, "I am only your servant. All glory belongs to you." His tears mingled with the last drops of rain. The crowd slowly scattered, but by the next morning, all of Israel would be speaking of what they had witnessed. Children would recount the wonder in excited voices. The elderly would share the story with tears in their eyes. The fire from heaven and the rain from the sky, this miracle would be remembered for generations. Our lives too have moments like this. A turning point comes, and everything after is never the same. Have you ever had such a moment? Share in the comments, "Yes, my life has changed," or "No, I am still waiting." Because when God touches a moment, it can become eternal. Yet the echo of that night did not last long. A darker voice soon rose in the palace. Queen Jezebel's fury would chase Elijah into fear, shaking him even after such a great triumph. And so we ask, what is the greater test, winning a victory or keeping it? Write in the comments. For Elijah's story would soon take a dramatic turn. After fire and rain on Mount Carmel, his journey was about to face its deepest trial, but one truth remained, echoing under the stars: the Lord is God. Though the people returned home, that truth burned in their hearts. Elijah stood on the rock, looking one last time at the sky. He knew this victory was only the beginning. Greater tests lay ahead. But for that moment, the heart of Israel had turned back to God, and the voices of false gods were silenced. Even now, centuries later, this story whispers, the fire and the rain are from the Lord. The question remains, who will we choose to listen to? As dawn broke, the mountain awoke in silence. After the night of rain, the earth smelled fresh, and the birds sang again. In the villages, people awoke still speaking of the miracle. Mothers told their children by the fire. The elderly shared it with shining eyes. And in every home, the same words were heard: the Lord is God. From the rock, Elijah watched the rising sun. "Lord," he prayed, "you have turned your people back once more, but I know how quickly hearts forget. Protect them, remind them, revive them." This prayer weighed heavy on him, because he knew miracles stir hearts only for a moment. The true battle is against forgetfulness. Isn't this our struggle too? We are shaken by a turning point, certain our lives have changed. But with time, old habits return, and the light of the miracle fades. Have you felt this? Write in the comments, "Yes, I forgot," or "No, I still remember." Because true faith is kept alive by remembering. With heavy steps, Elijah began his descent. Behind him lay the smoking altar, the wet earth, and the silent witness of the stars. But ahead were trials greater than fire or rain. For the Lord would not only speak in miracles, but in whispers. His footsteps sank into the mud, each one leaving a mark. Yet the deeper mark was on his heart. The people too returned to daily life, but the vision of fire and rain followed them into their dreams. Children woke trembling from dreams of fire, then smiled as they recalled the rain on their faces. This was not just a story for one day, it was a legacy, carried forward from generation to generation. Have you ever lived through a day so powerful that it left a mark on your soul forever? A moment etched so deeply in your memory that even after years, it feels as if it just happened. Share your story in the comments. Because sometimes God's touch doesn't just transform a single moment, it reshapes the course of generations. On Mount Carmel, such a day unfolded. For Israel, it was a new beginning, a day of fire and rain, a day that would echo through history as living proof that God had not abandoned his people. Elijah understood this was more than a miracle. It was a calling, an invitation, a powerful voice reaching from the past into the present, speaking to all who longed to hear God's truth. Tension was mounting on Mount Carmel. After days of thirst and uncertainty, the people had gathered desperate for an answer. On one side stood hundreds, the prophets of Baal, shouting, tearing at themselves, waiting for fire to fall from heaven. On the other side, one man stood alone, Elijah. Yet he was not truly alone. With him were the memories of Cherith's silence and Zarephath's miracles. Now before the silent heavens, the hearts of the people longed for a response. Elijah's voice broke through the crowd. How long will you hesitate between two opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal is God, then follow him. The people said nothing. Their silence in the face of truth was itself an admission of guilt. All eyes turned to the prophets of Baal. From dawn until noon they cried out, cutting themselves, collapsing to the ground. But the sky remained still. Not a single spark descended. The silence of their idols thundered louder than any voice. Hundreds of voices begged the heavens, but only the wind replied. Their blood stained the earth, yet no fire came down. Whispers stirred among the people. Why is there no answer? That silence became one of God's clearest words. Then Elijah called the people near. He took 12 stones, one for each tribe of Israel, and built an altar. He arranged the wood, prepared the sacrifice. Then to everyone's shock he commanded, "Fill 4 jars with water and pour it over the offering." In the midst of drought, the command seemed impossible. Yet once, twice, 3 times the jars were emptied. Water ran down and filled the trench around the altar. The crowd held its breath. Wet wood does not burn, but that was the point. Only God's power could be revealed here. Now let me ask you, do you think truth is revealed more often through miracles or through silence? Write it in the comments, miracle or silence. Because sometimes God speaks in fire and sometimes in a whisper. Elijah lifted his hands toward heaven. The people stood in absolute stillness. He prayed, "O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and I am your servant. Turn their hearts back to you." And then it happened. Fire fell from heaven. Flames consumed the sacrifice, the wood, the stones, even the water in the trench. The people dropped to their knees, crying with one voice, "The Lord, He is God! The Lord, He is God!" In that moment, the heart of a nation shifted. Before the silence of lifeless idols, the fire of heaven spoke. This is how truth sometimes reveals itself, a flame that conquers even stone and water. Yet fire alone is not proof of truth. The true sign is when the heart of a nation turns. Elijah faced Ahab. On the king's face lingered both astonishment and fear. "Go, eat and drink," Elijah told him, "for I hear the sound of heavy rain." The sky above was still sealed like a lid of bronze, but the promise pointed to a truth not yet visible. The people scattered across the mountain, some weeping softly, others lifting their faces to whisper a word long forgotten, "Hallelujah." Elijah climbed once more toward the peak. His steps were steady, not hurried, carrying the weight of Cherith's solitude, the crumbs of Zarephath's bread, the widow's quiet tears. This is how God's path is often woven, through unseen valleys, hidden rooms, small acts of faithfulness. Then a murmur rose among the people. Is it finished? Relief mixed with hesitation in their voices. For after every miracle comes the same unease. What now? The fire had burned out, but life remained. Fields to tend, families fractured, consciences wounded. Elijah's face bore no hardness, only a peace that seemed weightless. Carmel's judgment was not an ending but a beginning. Where idols stayed silent, hearts were meant to speak. Elijah's words were not of condemnation but of direction. He dismissed Ahab, guided the people, and then climbed higher, seeking once more to be alone with God. As the flames had risen, the people's faces changed. Eyes once doubtful, now glimmered with fear and awe. Children clung to their mothers' hands. The elderly wept openly. This was not just a miracle, it was a turning point etched forever into the nation's memory. Elijah had answered the silence of idols with the living power of God. The people's hearts trembled, not only at the fire they had seen, but at the truth revealed, who God is and who God is not. Nothing would ever be the same again, but remember, every miracle is followed by a test. The crowd had fallen to their knees, but would their hearts remain changed? Or would fear slowly give way to forgetfulness? Do you think people truly change when they witness a miracle, or does the power of that moment fade with time? Share your thoughts in the comments. Because maybe we are the same, shaken today by fire, yet tomorrow, walking back on our old paths. The cry that rose with the flames seemed to shake even the stones of the mountain. The prophets of Baal shrank back in terror. No words came from their lips, only fear in their eyes, shame on their faces. And now the people understood the truth. Idols remain silent, but God answers with fire. Elijah knew this moment was more than a victory. It was a sign written into the hearts of the people. Yet it was also a turning point, a decision. Because the miracle alone was not enough, hearts had to change. Which side would you have stood on? With the prophets of Baal trembling in fear, or with the people who fell to their knees and cried, "The Lord is God"? Share your thoughts in the comments, because this choice is not theirs alone, it is one we face every day. The cry, "The Lord is God," had barely faded when Elijah's voice cut like a blade. "Seize the prophets of Baal. Let none escape." The crowd surged forward. Moments ago they had shaken with fear. Now they moved with the weight of truth. Down the stony slope of Carmel they went, into the valley of Kishon. And there by the rushing waters, the false voices were silenced. There is no need to embellish this scene. Justice is not shouted, it moves slowly, deeply. What happened at Kishon etched itself into the conscience of a nation, the years of fear before idols, the anger of betrayal, the trembling joy of turning back to God. Some closed their eyes, others fell to the ground, pressing their hands into the earth. Judgment was spoken. Israel declared, not just with words but with choice, "The Lord is God." For a moment even the wind held its breath. Then a coolness drifted down from Carmel's heights, as if the mountain itself sighed. Elijah turned toward the altar. The stones blackened, the wood reduced to ash, even the water in the trench gone. Some laughed, some wept. The rain washed not only the soil but the hearts of the people. A single storm ended 3 years of thirst. Yet this was more than physical rain. It was heaven's signature, sealing the truth of God's word. Judgment had begun with fire and was completed with rain. Let me pause here and ask you, how do you see the line between justice and mercy? To defend the truth can be as necessary to begin something new as it is to end something old. Share one word in the comments, justice or mercy. Which should come first? The sky darkened as the sun dipped west. Heat clung to the mountain like smoke, giving way to the cool of evening. The crows cried in the silence around Kishon. Elijah climbed higher, then crouched with his head between his knees. It was not defeat, it was surrender. "Lord," he whispered, "turn their hearts back to you." In the distance his servant waited. "Look toward the sea," Elijah said, without raising his head. "What do you see?" The servant scanned the horizon. "Only emptiness." "Nothing," he replied. Elijah bowed again. Silence pressed heavy, like prayer. Then once more, "Look again." Back and forth the servant went. Again and again, emptiness. 7 times, because great promises are often tested by small steps. On the 7th time, his voice shook. A small cloud, the size of a man's hand. That small sign spoke louder than the fire on Carmel. A cloud no bigger than a palm, a herald of mercy. For sometimes truth falls as fire, and sometimes it appears as a humble cloud. The wind shifted from mountain to sea. The air itself seemed to change. The ground breathed of rain before it even fell. Heads lifted, thunder rumbled in the distance. Black clouds gathered swiftly. Elijah's words were written not in the sky but in the heart. Yet the sky answered. Soon the rain would come, the drought would end, the earth would breathe again, and in that moment another truth gleamed. The fall of idols is not just the collapse of stone, but the breaking of fear within the heart. This is what happened on Carmel, on the day when fire spoke. Silence also told its story. Elijah remained on the mountaintop, his head bowed between his knees as the sky grew darker and heavier. The roar of the crowd was far behind him now. Only the distant roll of thunder echoed across the horizon. The tiny cloud his servant had once called the size of a man's hand was swelling into a storm. Shadows gathered in the west, spreading like ink across the heavens. Encouraged by Elijah's words, Ahab climbed into his chariot. His horses snorted and pawed at the dry earth, their breath quickening as the wheels began to spin. People hurried down the mountainside, searching for shelter, for the heavens. Silent for 3 long years were about to break open. And then it came, the first chill of wind, followed by great drops of rain that splashed upon the cracked ground. Lightning split the sky. Faces turned upward as the long-awaited storm drenched the land. Elijah rose, the wind howling and the rain hammering around him. He tucked his robe into his belt and began to run. And though Ahab's horses thundered down the road, Elijah outran them, for the Spirit of the Lord had come upon him. This was not just the strength of a prophet. It was the hand of God moving with his servant. Have you ever felt such moments, when fire falls, then rain follows? When judgment gives way to mercy? Think of your own journey. Have you seen it, or are you still waiting? Share it in the comments. Yes, I have seen it, or no, I am waiting. For Elijah's story reflects the truths that still echo in our lives today. The harder the rain fell, the greater the people's joy became. Children splashed in puddles, women lifted their hands toward heaven, men dropped to their knees in gratitude. This was more than relief from drought. It was a sign of God's compassion, poured out once again upon his people. Elijah felt the cool drops strike his face as he ran ahead of the king's chariot. Yet in his heart he carried something greater. The fire of judgment had fallen, and now came the rains of mercy. But Elijah knew the story was not finished. Every victory is followed by new trials. The downpour washed over the earth, and the smell of wet soil rose from Mount Carmel. Shouts of joy mingled with the roar of the storm. A nation's thirst was quenched, not just with water, but with hope. And still Elijah pressed forward, his feet pounding the mud. His hair whipped in the wind, his garments clung to him, and even the king could not turn away from the sight. For God's power had carried the prophet beyond human strength. Elijah's steps echoed with the cry, "The Lord is God." And as the people looked on from afar, a new voice stirred within their hearts, "God is with us." But a question remained. Would their joy endure once the storm passed? Or would hearts drift back into old ways? My friend, what do you think? Comment permanent or temporary. Because the truth of faith is tested not only by miracles, but by the faithfulness that follows them. The storm darkened the skies, lightning flashing and thunder shaking the mountains. And as Elijah ran beneath the curtain of rain, he understood, fire and water are miracles, but the real battle is fought within the heart. That battle had only just begun. Already, Queen Jezebel's fury was rising like a storm of its own. Soon Elijah would be tested again, by fear, by pursuit, by the weight of despair. Ahab's chariot sped toward Jezreel, mud flying beneath pounding hooves, sparks flashing from iron horseshoes. And yet the king could not take his eyes off the prophet who ran ahead of him. How could a barefoot man outpace galloping horses? It was proof enough for all who saw it. The hand of God was upon Elijah. There was no triumph on Elijah's face. In his eyes burned the weight of a greater truth. Fire and rain were miracles, yes, but the true question was still unanswered. Had hearts really changed? For miracles stir the eyes, but only transformation reaches the soul. Have you ever felt such a moment in your own life? When everyone around you says you've won, but deep inside you whisper, it's not over yet. Because sometimes victory is only the beginning. The real battle begins where no one else can see. If you understand this, write one word in the comments, yes or no. Elijah's feet pounded the earth, thunder echoing beside him. Lightning tore the darkness, rain soaked his clothes until they clung heavy against his body. Still he kept running. A mission burned in his spirit, a burden pressed on his heart. The people had seen fire, they had felt rain, but had their hearts turned to the Lord? That unanswered question was the storm raging inside him. The downpour had not ceased when the lights of Jezreel flickered in the distance. Ahab rode ahead in his chariot, his eyes forward, his mind behind, still lost on Mount Carmel. He had seen truth proven by fire and water, yet fear and pride lingered in his heart. The miracle had pressed against the king's soul, but it had not broken it. As Elijah ran, the faces of the people rose before him, faces bent to the ground in worship, voices crying out, tears falling like rain. But what would they do when the morning came? Would they walk a new path after seeing God's signs, or drift back to old ways as if nothing had changed? And what about you? How would you respond to such a miracle? Would you slip back into daily routine and let it fade from memory? Or would you carry it with you, step by step, for the rest of your life? Write in the comments, "I will forget," or "I will remember." The storm within Elijah only grew. He felt no peace after victory, only a heavier weight. God's wonders were glorious, but the hearts of men were still uncertain. Elijah knew the true test always comes after the miracle. Beneath the roar of the rain, loneliness stirred in the prophet's soul. He ran with God, yet questions about human faithfulness haunted him. These very questions would one day cast the shadow of his deepest despair. This was a chapter where fire had fallen, rain had poured, miracles had shouted truth. Yet it was also the threshold of another trial. Because the truth is not only in the miracle itself, but in the choices made afterward. And so a new curtain was about to rise. For before the joy of victory had even dried, the shadows had already begun to whisper inside Jezreel's palace. The distant barking of dogs, the wind muffling his footsteps. He pulled his cloak tighter, bowed his head, and slipped across the city's border in silence. With every step, a single phrase echoed in his mind. By this time tomorrow, time itself had become an hourglass, each falling grain a weight upon his chest, counting down to a single menacing threat. He chose the southern route, towards the border of Judah, a place he hoped the queen's reach could not instantly extend. But fear doesn't just come from outside threats, it echoes from within. Elijah felt it with every mile. The shadow of a rock became a hidden trap, the rustle of the wind, the breath of a pursuer. Am I alone, he wondered. Am I the prophet of the Lord, or just a lonely man on the run? Only yesterday, all of Israel had been mesmerized by the fire from heaven on Mount Carmel. The people had fallen to their knees, their voices rising as one. The Lord, He is God. It was the pinnacle of victory. The heavenly fire had consumed the stones, the sacrifice and the water. Before the eyes of a nation, the silence of false gods was shattered by the power of the one true God. But after the brightest light comes the darkest shadow. The news traveled fast, and when it reached the palace, Queen Jezebel's threat, dripping with arrogance and rage, was sent in return. May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them. Her words were a dagger to his heart. He had called down fire from the sky, yet the vow of one woman now made him tremble with the fear of death. Victory had plunged Elijah into a profound loneliness. The brilliant fire was gone from his eyes, replaced by the shadow of Jezebel's threat. The man who had single-handedly challenged a kingdom was now fleeing for his life. Have you ever experienced a contradiction like that? Right after a moment of incredible strength, have you ever heard a whisper that brought you to your knees? That exhaustion, that fear that can follow a great victory. Let me know in the comments. Just type yes, I've felt it, or no, I haven't. Because this moment isn't just a test for Elijah, it's a reflection of a struggle we all face. He ran, stumbling through the fading light of day and the deep dark of night. With every step, the same question pierced his heart. Am I truly the only one left? Why am I so afraid when I am a prophet of God? It was then that the cost of victory revealed itself. Great miracles bring great burdens, and sometimes the heaviest burden is the fear you carry in your own heart. The sky was silent. The desert stars had once been his companions, but now even their light could not pierce the darkness within him. As his loneliness grew, the emptiness deepened. The man who had spoken with a thunderous voice before crowds now found the sound of his own breath to be as heavy as stone. His knees shook, his chest tightened. I am alone, he whispered, and that whisper felt more devastating than the fire that had fallen from heaven. If even God's prophet could reach such a breaking point, is it any surprise when we do? Where do you think true strength is found? In the moment of the miracle, or in the struggle to stand up again in the midst of fear? Think about it. When night fell, the queen's messenger had hurried down the palace's stone steps, his words as brief and searing as a candle's flame. The sentence echoed in Elijah's ears like a final judgment. He understood instantly. This wasn't just royal politics. This was the fury of a shamed queen and her silenced idols, coming for him with a vengeance. His heart, which had been so bold on the field of victory, now beat like a trapped bird against the cage of his ribs. Was staying an act of courage or pointless defiance? Was leaving an act of cowardice or a step of obedience toward a new path God had hidden from him? Elijah waited for the cover of darkness. Before the city gates of Jezreel were locked for the night, he vanished into the quiet streets. The shadows stretched long, the torches crackled on the walls, and the moonlight glinted off the spear tips of the city guards. He pushed on until he reached Beersheba, at the edge of Judah. The sounds of the waking city, the first calls from the marketplace, the soft clinking of jars at the wells, were a world away from his inner turmoil. He looked at his servant, seeing both loyalty and weariness in the young man's eyes. Elijah stopped. He didn't have to say, "Stay here." His gaze said it all. Some paths must be walked alone. The servant remained, and Elijah walked on, past the last outpost of civilization and toward the pale, shimmering line of the desert. As the sun climbed higher, the stones began to bake, and the dust choked the air. In a flash, he saw it again, the fire on Carmel, dancing over water-soaked trenches and wet stones. Then, just as quickly, Jezebel's words fell over the memory, like a dark curtain. The victory was real, but it offered no comfort now, because sometimes victory is just the doorway to the next trial, and that door often opens into the wilderness. I want to ask you, in his position, would you have stayed to face the threat or retreated to survive and await a new direction? Choose one in the comments. I would stay or I would retreat. Because sometimes true courage isn't found in a noisy public square, but in the wisdom to withdraw and listen for the right voice. Beersheba was far behind him now. The desert opened up before him like a vast silent page. The sand whispered under his feet, urging him onward. Elijah sighed, the sound rattling in his chest like a dry leaf. He watched birds circle high in the air and a yellow snake slither through the thorns. It was in that moment he understood. You don't confront your true self in a crowd. You confront it in the silence of solitude. And that confrontation, as always, was brutal, but purifying. The road ahead was long and his shadow was short, but a flicker of hope, the promise of an answer, began to burn in his heart. Under the searing midday sun, the sky felt like a sheet of fire. Elijah's steps grew heavy. Thirst burned his lips, and the stones beneath his feet felt like hot coals. He looked up, and the redness of the sun seemed to bring back the flames of Carmel. But now, that fire was not a symbol of power. It was a painful memory. He finally collapsed in the shade of a lone broom tree. Falling to his knees, he covered his face with his hands. The words that escaped his lips were a raw confession, hurled against the silent sky. It is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors. It was the most bitter prayer ever uttered by a prophet. The man who had called down fire was now begging God for the release of death. Isn't Elijah's cry the secret prayer in all of us? Have you ever felt that the weight you carry is simply too much to bear? Let me know. Yes, I have felt that, or no, I haven't. Because even the strongest among us can find themselves at the edge of despair. His body, exhausted from hunger and thirst, finally gave in. As his eyes drifted shut, the darkness inside him whispered one final word: enough. But in that moment of surrender, an unseen hand was already reaching from the heavens. In the silence, a presence stirred, as light as a touch, but as powerful as lightning. As Elijah drifted into sleep, God's answer was already on its way. Because no desert is left desolate without a divine purpose, every wasteland is the threshold of a new encounter. As sleep descended like a mercy, he felt a sudden touch. It was a gentle but firm hand on his shoulder. His eyelids were heavy, but a voice whispered in his ear, clear and strong, "Arise and eat." He opened his eyes, and before him, on stones still hot from the coals, lay freshly baked bread and a jug of water. Elijah could hardly believe it. With trembling hands, he took a piece of bread. He lifted the water to his chapped lips. Each bite, each sip, felt like life itself flowing back into him. Then he fell back into a deep sleep. But a second time, the same touch, the same voice, "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you." This time, Elijah didn't hesitate. He ate the bread and drank the water. Strength surged through his body. His spirit, once wasted, now felt resilient. The desert, which had been a place of death, was now a gateway. God was not just protecting him, he was preparing him. Have you ever had a moment like that? Just when you thought you were completely spent, did strength arrive from an unexpected place? Write in the comments, yes I have, or no, never. Because God's touch can be quieter than a miracle, but its mark is often deeper. With the strength from that meal, Elijah began a journey of 40 days and 40 nights. He traveled under the scorching sun and the silent stars, heading toward Horeb, the mountain of God. Each step was a prayer. Each breath was a confession. Why me, he wondered. Why was I chosen, only to be left so alone after the victory? It's a question we all ask, isn't it? We pass a test, we overcome an obstacle, but there's still an emptiness inside. Why do you think that is? Share your thoughts. I've felt incomplete after a victory. Or no, I've never felt that way. This journey is a mirror. Not just for Elijah's heart, but for ours. The road was long. Sand gave way to hard rock, plains to deep valleys. When Mount Horeb finally appeared like a great shadow on the horizon, Elijah's heart was filled with both hope and dread. He knew an answer was waiting for him there, and this time it wouldn't come as fire from the sky. He reached the mountain and found a cave. As he collapsed at its entrance, the confession that had been building inside him finally broke free. "Lord," he cried out, "I have been so zealous for you, but the people have turned away. They have torn down your altars and put your prophets to the sword. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." Tears streamed down his face. The mask of the powerful prophet had fallen away, leaving behind only a broken and vulnerable soul. "I am the only one left. Have you ever felt that way? Completely and utterly alone? Let me know. Yes, I have felt that loneliness. Or no, not at all. Because Elijah's prayer is the echo of a prayer we all carry in our hearts. That night, as he huddled in the mouth of the cave, a promise whispered into his soul. "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." The next morning, Elijah stood at the entrance to the cave, his heart pounding. Suddenly, a great and powerful wind tore through the mountains, shattering the rocks. But the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind there was an earthquake, shaking the very foundations of the earth. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, its roar turning the sky to flame. But the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire, a still small voice, a gentle whisper, almost silent, yet it pierced his very soul. Elijah immediately pulled his cloak over his face and fell to his knees, because God was there. Not in the thunder, not in the fury, but in the quiet. In that moment, Elijah's heart was filled with both awe and peace. Perhaps you've noticed this in your own life. The loudest moments are not always the most profound. The greatest answers often arrive not in the storm, but in the silence that follows. Where have you heard God's voice more clearly? In the chaos or in the quiet? Share your experience in the comments, because Elijah's encounter shows us that God's presence is often found not in the spectacle, but in the whisper. And so Elijah understood. Jezebel's whisper brought fear. God's whisper brought hope and strength. The price of victory had been loneliness, but the gift of that loneliness was an encounter with God. The voice in the cave pointed not just to the wounds of the past, but to the path of the future. New tasks, new roads, and unexpected allies. When Elijah stepped out of that cave, he was no longer the same man. He was no longer alone. The road ahead was still filled with trials, but it was now a road walked with God. And that leads us to our next chapter, the story of what comes after the whisper. Day after day, Elijah fought to survive the scorching heat by day, the bitter cold by night. Hunger gnawed at him, thirst weakened him, and fear clouded his mind. Yet still, he walked. The angel's voice lingered in his ears. "You have a long way to go." And those words turned every step, every breath, into a prayer. At times he lifted his eyes to the stars, searching for God's gaze in their silent shimmer. Other times, he fell to his knees, hiding his sobs in the sand. The desert was a mirror of his heart, thirsty, wounded, yet held in the hands of God. Have you ever walked such a desert path? A journey unseen by others, yet one that tests you more deeply with each step. Maybe in your work, your family, or within your own soul. How did you endure those moments? Share with us in the comments. Because Elijah's desert is also ours. Night fell heavy over the wilderness, covering the sands in silver under the moon. The stars seemed closer, like silent witnesses. Inside Elijah, the echo was louder than the silence outside. The cry of Carmel, "The Lord is God," was now only a fading memory. The victory at Kishon became a heavy question in his heart. Why do I feel so empty after triumph? The queen's threat still burned in his mind. Fear often grows in the shadow of our brightest victories. Elijah's footprints were swept away by the wind, but the wounds inside him remained. His lips cracked, his shoulders sank. Between his heart and God lay an invisible veil. I am alone, utterly alone. Yet as the sun rose, so did a flicker of hope. He had seen fire fall from heaven, heard the people proclaim, "The Lord is God." But Jezebel's words drowned out the memory. The prophet who once called down fire now fled from death. And as he stumbled across the sands, his prayer broke out, "Lord, it is enough, take my life." Not just the plea of a weary man, but the cry of an empty soul. The collapse after victory revealed his deepest weakness, because sometimes even the greatest miracles cannot fill the emptiness inside. Have you felt that too? Right after your greatest success, have you faced an unexplainable emptiness? In those moments, did you whisper, "I can't go on"? If so, write "I've been there" in the comments, because Elijah's story is not his alone, it is ours as well. Exhausted, Elijah lay down beneath a broom bush. He closed his eyes, body heavy with despair. From the heights of victory, he had fallen to the depths of defeat. But instead of condemnation, God sent compassion. An angel appeared, setting before him bread and water. "Get up and eat," the angel said. Elijah realized then that sometimes God does not speak through storms, but through quiet gifts. Still, his weariness was so deep that he fell asleep again. The angel touched him a second time, "Get up and eat, for the journey is long." It was heaven's answer to his exhaustion. God wasn't asking him to perform miracles, only to rise and walk. And what about you? When God whispers, "The road is long," do you give up or do you keep going? Write "I keep going" or "I stop" in the comments. Your words might bring hope to someone else. Elijah stood again, trembling, but with the angel's words engraved on his heart, "You have a long way to go." He didn't know how far, but he knew each step was seen by God. The desert was not only a trial of the body, it was a battle of the soul. For days he walked, the heat burning, his strength fading. Yet with each step the angel's words echoed, "The way is long." It was both a warning and a comfort. because though the road was long, he was never alone. Have you walked such a road? When your steps grew heavy, when your heart wanted to give up, did a voice within urge you to keep moving? Share your story in the comments. Elijah's journey is not his alone, it belongs to us all. In the silence of the desert, Elijah lost track of time. You too may have struggled, unsure if the answer awaited you at the end. Did you keep moving forward, or did you turn back? Share with us, because Elijah's cave is also within each of our hearts. The cave's silence carried the weight of centuries. Elijah curled up in the darkness, breath heavy, thoughts scattered. He longed for God's voice, but only the silence of stone surrounded him. Has God abandoned me? The thought trembled inside him. Then came a stormy wind, tearing through the mountains. Rock shattered, stones fell. Elijah trembled, but God was not in the wind. The ground shook, the cave walls cracked. He hid his face in his hands, heart pounding. But God was not in the earthquake. Then fire blazed across the mountain. Elijah shielded his eyes. Yet again, God was not in the fire. And then a whisper, gentle, low, almost hidden in the silence. But it touched the deepest part of his heart. Elijah covered his face with his cloak and stepped to the cave's entrance. God had come, not in the storm, not in the fire, but in the quiet whisper. Beneath the broom bush, Elijah had once tasted bread warm from the ashes, water cool as the night. On Carmel, God had spoken through fire. Here, he spoke through stillness. Elijah ate, he drank, but the weight of exhaustion remained. His soul's cry was not shouted aloud, but written deep within his bones. Lord, it is enough. When the journey began again, the days seemed to blend into one another. The sun rose from the same horizon, burned with the same heat, and sank each evening in the same red glow. Steps no longer felt like numbers to be counted, but like a rhythm of prayer. Every step echoed with the angel's words, "Your way is long." Elijah began to see mercy hidden in that message. God wasn't asking him to be a hero, only to rise and walk. Each bite of bread carried the command to keep going. Each sip of water whispered the promise, "You are not alone." Sometimes Elijah searched the sky for clouds, sometimes the ground for a path, but the truest sign was a small flame burning deep within him, presence. God's presence wasn't in the storm, but in the quiet strength to endure. If he still feeds me and gives me drink, then he must still want something from me, Elijah thought. This wasn't pride, but the reshaping of a heart crumbled into dust, lifted by compassion. At night, drifting between sleep and waking, memories returned, the child's breath restored in Zarephath, the fire descending on Carmel, the awe and terror on the people's faces. And behind each memory, the same question lingered. Did I carry it, or did he? The answer came as softly as the desert wind. You could not carry it. Yet this truth didn't shame him, it freed him, for the burden had always belonged to God. Have you ever felt that way? After conquering something heavy, realizing the strength was never truly yours. What did that change in you? Write 2 words in the comments. I endured, or I stopped. Because sometimes, another person's story becomes the courage for our next step. Day after day, Elijah's steps led him closer to Mount Horeb. His desert wandering had been a test, but now a holy encounter awaited him. Fear and wonder stirred within. How would God speak this time? The same God who once rained fire on Carmel, what would he say in this desolate place? As Elijah pressed on, the weight of exhaustion grew. His knees shook, his shoulders bent as if carrying stone. Yet within, the angel's voice still echoed, "You have a long way to go." That voice steadied him, lifting him each time he stumbled. At last he reached a cave. Inside was cool but heavy with darkness, a mirror of his own heart. Leaning against the stone, he closed his eyes and whispered, "At the end of all this, will I find God, or only the sound of my own emptiness?" Have you ever felt like that? For true strength is not in endless courage, but in surrender, the weary man laying his weakness before God. Don't you agree? Sometimes our strongest moment is born from our most broken one. When have you found strength? Share below. I found strength in my weakness, or I haven't discovered it yet. Perhaps your words will be light for someone else. In Elijah's brokenness, new meaning dawned. God heals what is shattered, stretches the road of the weary, whispers into the silence. A new chapter opened before him, written not with thunder, but with a quiet, powerful line from God's own hand. Climbing higher into the mountain, uncertainty still lay ahead. But behind the unknown, Elijah sensed the shape of God's plan. To men he looked defeated, to God he was a tool still being shaped. This truth ignited a new fire within him, because God was not finished. He watched an eagle soaring high, with wings surrendered to the wind. The bird seemed to do nothing, yet in that surrender, it found its greatest strength. Elijah saw himself in that flight. "That is how I must be," he said, "not strong in myself, but carried by the wind of God." And with that thought, his steps grew lighter. Have you ever felt like a bird in the wind, letting go of control and trusting only in God's breath? What was it like? Comment, "Yes, I surrendered," or "No, I still resist." Your answer may give another traveler room to breathe. The journey born out of Elijah's brokenness became the quietest yet most fruitful season of his life. For sometimes, God pulls us away from the crowds, into solitude, to prepare the work ahead. Elijah stood on the threshold of such a calling. His steps no longer thundered with triumph, they echoed with the strength of a whisper. Why do you think? Why did God speak in a whisper and not in a roar? Perhaps because only in silence can we truly hear power. Where do you hear his voice more? Amid the noise or in the stillness? Share your answer. It may guide another pilgrim on their way. After the whisper, a deep calm filled the cave. Elijah sank to his knees. His heart, once pounding with fear, was now still for the first time. God's power had touched him, not through fire or thunder, but through a breath of silence. And in that moment, Elijah realized God was not found in the noise of victory, but in the quiet corners of the heart. Then in that silence, God's voice stirred within him. "Elijah, what are you doing here?" It was not a question of judgment, but an invitation, an opening for Elijah to pour out his weariness and fear. His answer was simple, fragile and true. "I have tried so hard, but I am alone." There was a pause. Then God spoke again. "Go back, your journey is not over. I still have work for you." Those words were not condemnation, but renewal. God did not see a man who had failed. He saw a servant who could rise again. Have you ever cried out to God in your exhaustion? What kind of answer did you hope for? Share in the comments. "I waited," or "I gave up," because often God's greatest miracle is not changing our path, but giving us the strength to walk it again. When Elijah stepped out of the cave, the sun bathed the mountain in golden light. His body was still tired, but his spirit had new meaning. To keep going, God's voice had not only directed him, it had lifted him. The road ahead was not an ending, it was a beginning. He took a deep breath, as if inhaling the last echo of that whisper. Then he turned back toward the mountain path. Every step was an answer, every breath was obedience. From the depth of exhaustion, new life was born. Have you ever stepped out of your own cave? Have you walked from darkness into light, only to discover a beginning where you thought the road had ended? Tell us in the comments. Because Elijah's brokenness is not just his story, it is ours. It is the story of anyone who waits for the whisper of God. As Elijah descended the mountain, the echo still lingered in his heart. He searched for it in every stone, every gust of wind. But fear was gone. In its place was peace. It was as though God was still whispering, "You may be weary, but my plan is not." Ahead, new tasks awaited. Elijah would confront kings, anoint prophets, and lift God's people once again. Yet more importantly, he carried with him the memory of his weakness and the strength that silence had given him. For the road would not be easy. Jezebel's shadow, the doubts of Israel, the trials of kings, all still lay before him. But what Elijah had learned in the cave would not fade. A whisper from God can shape not only a man but a nation, and so after the whisper, a new chapter began. God's greatest secret, the power not of storms but of silence. In the next part you will see how this secret, revealed on Mount Horeb, changed the course of history. These words were a promise that Elijah would no longer walk alone. God was not only giving him new tasks, but also a companion, an heir to carry on his mission. The emptiness that followed triumph opened the door to something new, because even in weariness, God lifts the heart. Elijah now understood God's deepest secret was not hidden in the storm, but revealed in the silence. After 40 long days in the desert, Elijah reached Mount Horeb. His steps were heavy, his body worn, and his heart still burdened by Jezebel's threat. Yet he was kept alive by bread and water, given through God's angel. At the foot of the mountain, he found a cave. He entered leaning against the cold stone. It became his refuge, his waiting place. In the stillness of the night, the cave was silent, but Elijah's thoughts were restless. The fire on Mount Carmel still burned in his memory. The cries of the people, "The Lord is God," still rang in his ears. And yet after such victory, why had loneliness pierced him so deeply? Why did his heart feel so empty after triumph? Then God's voice broke through the night. "Elijah, what are you doing here?" Elijah poured out his sorrow. "Lord, I have fought for you, but Israel has broken your covenant and killed your prophets. I am alone, and now they seek my life." It was not the voice of a conqueror, but of a weary, broken man. The Lord answered, "Go and stand on the mountain before me." Suddenly, a violent wind tore across the peaks, shattering the rocks. Elijah trembled at the cave's entrance, but the Lord was not in the wind. Then the ground shook with a great earthquake. Stones split, the earth cracked apart, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After that came fire, blazing across the sky, wrapping the mountain in light. Yet still, the Lord was not in the fire. And then, a sound so faint, yet carrying power that shook Elijah's soul. He pulled his robe over his face, for this was the true presence of God. And what about you? Where have you heard God most clearly, in mighty miracles, or in quiet moments? Write in the comments, "I have heard him in the whisper," or "I have heard him in the storm." This choice reveals the posture of your heart toward God. When Elijah heard the whisper, his heart trembled. In that moment he understood, God's greatest power is not found in noise or violence, but in silence that reaches the depths of the human spirit. Slowly, Elijah stepped from the cave and fell to his knees, his face still covered. The holy presence had descended in the mountain's silence. Again, the Lord asked, "Elijah, what are you doing here?" Elijah repeated his lament, but now his voice was softer, cracked with the weight of God's presence. Words themselves felt heavy before the Almighty. Then God gave him a mission. "Go back the way you came. Take the desert road to Damascus. Anoint Hazael as king over Aram. Anoint Jehu as king over Israel. And choose your successor, Elisha, son of Shaphat. Anoint him as prophet." When will my people hear the whisper again? Elijah wondered. On Carmel they had cried out at fire from heaven, but perhaps now God would speak not in thunder, but in silence. Elijah set out again, carrying God's words with him. Hazael, Jehu, Elisha, each name was a seed of the future. Through them, a new era would rise. Elijah realized this. He had only begun the work. God's plan stretched far beyond him. Have you ever felt God showing you a new path right after your greatest breaking point? Write in the comments, "Yes, I have found a new way," or "No, I am still searching," because often God's answers arrive when our strength has run dry. Elijah left the cave with a heavy heart but renewed steps. The wind of Horeb brushed his face, as if God's whisper still echoed in his ears. He was no longer just a prophet, but a bearer of a new mission. God had shown him that even in the darkest hour, he was not abandoned. And the thought burned within him, "The Lord was not in the storm, not in the fire, but in the whisper, he was with me." These words stayed in his heart, for only God's silent presence could heal the exhaustion that follows miracles. A new path was opening on the horizon. The desert roads leading to Damascus promised not only hardship, but also a new beginning. Elijah knew that Hazael and Jehu were more than political figures. They were signs of a new chapter in God's plan. And above all, there was Elisha, the son of Shaphat, the disciple who would carry Elijah's burden, the one destined to inherit his fire. Perhaps you felt a moment like this in your own life. Just when you thought you were utterly alone, a companion appeared by your side. Do you believe that was coincidence or God's quiet answer to your need? Share your thoughts in the comments. After leaving Mount Horeb, Elijah walked through the desert. The sky still carried the weight of drought, but inside Elijah was something new, the calm of a whisper. With every step, God's silence gave him strength. Strength deeper than the clash of swords or fire falling from heaven. As he traveled, his thoughts drifted back. He remembered the triumph on Mount Carmel, the shouts of the people, the fall of the false prophets. And then he remembered that moment in the cave, kneeling, hearing God's gentle voice. Could it be that the true journey of a prophet is not about fire or thunder, but about learning to hear that one whisper? But now, another test lay before Elijah, to return, just as God had commanded, to walk back into the land where death awaited him. This was the essence of courage, not standing defiantly in the storm, but choosing obedience after the silence. And what about you? If you heard God's silent guidance, would you step onto a path filled with danger, or would you remain in the safety of the cave? Let me know in the comments. When Elijah rose to continue, the stones crackled beneath his feet, and the blazing sun climbed the horizon. Yet inside him was no fear, only trust. Each step carried him deeper into the whisper of God. This was not just a road to Damascus, it was a journey of purification through the wilderness of his own heart. At one point he encountered a caravan, weakened by thirst. Their eyes turned desperately to the sky, searching for rain. As Elijah passed, a thought stirred within him. Later that afternoon, the desert sky burned red. Heat shimmered across the horizon like shifting mirages. Through it all, one thought remained, God's voice in the silence. It had become his companion. With every breath, Elijah felt the peace of that whisper, a peace more enduring than the fire of Carmel. Tell me, do you think true peace is found after great victories or in life's simplest moments? When night fell, Elijah lay under the stars. His body was weary, but his heart was light, for God had taught him a secret in the silence. My power is in stillness. Elijah realized that miracles may open eyes, but silence heals hearts. And perhaps what people needed most was not thunder or flame, but a deep, abiding silence. What truly heals the heart? Is it loud, dazzling miracles or the quiet power of stillness? Have you ever faced something in life that felt far too big for you to handle? Share in the comments, yes, I've felt that way, or no, I've always managed on my own, because sometimes God's plan stretches far beyond the limits of our own steps. As Elijah wandered through the desert, shimmering mirages danced on the horizon. The heat wavered, shadows flickered, yet one thing remained steady in his soul, the voice of God. Not in the storm, not in the fire, but in a gentle whisper that still echoed in his heart. With every step, that whisper gave him strength, and as he walked, a question stirred within him. Elisha will follow me, but will he also hear this silence? Hope rose in his spirit, for God's work never rested on just one man. He was raising up a voice for every generation. One evening, when the sky burned crimson, Elijah lifted his eyes. For years the heavens had seemed silent. But in that moment, they spoke through him. God speaks when he wills, and when he speaks, the world falls silent. His heart swelled with this truth. Even in God's silence, there was a message. Do you believe God sometimes speaks most powerfully through silence? Write in the comments, yes, I've heard him in silence, or no, I've only seen him in miracles. Because often silence carries more than words ever could. Later, as Elijah journeyed on, the faint lights of a village appeared in the distance. Weariness weighed on him, but hope quickened his steps. He walked not only for himself, but for the future God was preparing. Elisha's name echoed in his thoughts, filling him with fresh resolve. This path was more than a journey, it was the passing on of a sacred legacy. As night fell and stars spread across the heavens, Elijah whispered, Lord, your voice is not in the storm, but in the silence between these stars. In that quiet confession, he found peace. He realized that while the spectacle of miracles may astonish crowds, it is silence that transforms hearts. Have you ever known such a moment? Away from the noise of the world, under the vast sky, have you felt God's whisper reach your soul? Share in the comments, yes, I felt it in the silence, or no, I've never had such a moment. Because sometimes God's greatest miracle hides in the stillness of the night. When dawn returned, Elijah set out once more. The desert wind was soft, but the echo inside him was strong. The whisper he once heard at Horeb now guided him like a compass. Every rock, every thorn reminded him of God's call. And as he walked, he murmured, Lord, even in silence, I walk with you. The sky was clear. People longed for rain, but Elijah now knew God's answer was not always in water from the clouds, but in the quiet confidence of a faithful heart. The fire at Carmel had opened the people's eyes. The silence at Horeb had opened his own. So let me ask you, what do you believe changes a life more? A fire that falls from heaven, or a whisper that burns in the depths of the heart? When Elijah woke the next morning, he set out once again. The desert still stretched far before him, but the loneliness was gone. The Lord had spoken to him in a whisper at Horeb, and that whisper rested like a seal upon his heart. With every step, the seal pressed deeper. Elijah understood now, God's plan was not finished. In truth, his real journey was only beginning. Have you ever felt that, just when you thought you were at the start of a path, God was quietly preparing an entirely new beginning? On the roadside he noticed shepherds, weary with thirst. Their sheep staggered, their eyes dimmed with hopelessness. Elijah drew near, yet he did not recount the miracle he had witnessed. He simply said, "The Lord is still here." The words were no water, but they cooled their hearts. And Elijah learned, sometimes the greatest miracle hides in the gentle comfort of a single sentence. When night fell, he did not light a fire. He lifted his gaze to the stars and followed the whisper within. And then it struck him. He did not need to search the heavens to find God. The Lord was already walking beside him. Have you ever given hope with nothing more than a single word? If so, write in the comments, "Yes, I have." If not, write, "No, not yet." One afternoon, as Elijah crossed the desert, the sky burned red. Mirages wavered on the horizon, but he held on to one thought: God's voice in the silence. That voice had become his companion. With each breath, he heard the peace of that whisper, a peace stronger than the fire at Carmel. Do you believe true peace comes after great victories or in the simplest of moments? That night he rested under starlight. His body was weary, but his heart felt light. For God had taught him through the whisper, "My power is in silence." And Elijah realized, miracles open eyes, but silence heals hearts. What the people longed for most was not thunderous wonders, but a deep, quiet stillness. What do you think heals hearts? Loud miracles or the power of quiet moments? Elijah rose again at dawn and walked on. The desert was still wide before him, but he no longer felt alone. The Lord had spoken in Horeb, and that whisper sealed his heart. Step by step it grew stronger. Elijah knew God's plan was still unfolding. The true journey was only just beginning. Have you ever felt that when you thought you were beginning, God was already preparing a new beginning? Elijah's heart was no longer filled with fear, but with surrender. The Lord had shown him something greater, the power found not in thunder or noise, but in silence. That power was lasting. As he walked, he tried to carry that silence to everyone he met. He didn't promise wonders, he didn't promise miracles. He simply said, "When the Lord speaks, let your heart learn to be still." This was the change within him. On Mount Carmel, the people cried out and God sent fire. But on Mount Horeb, it was the silence that spoke, and that silence reshaped Elijah. Do you believe the silence of the heart can be stronger than the noise of the tongue? One afternoon, as Elijah crossed the desert, the sky turned red. Heat shimmered on the horizon like moving shadows. Yet he carried only one thought, God's voice in the silence. It had become his companion. With every breath he felt the peace of that whisper, and that peace was stronger than the fire of Carmel. Do you think true peace comes after great victories or in the simplest, quietest moments? When night fell, Elijah rested under the stars. Laying his weary body on the ground, he felt his heart grow light. For God had taught him gently, "My strength is in silence." Elijah knew that miracles could open eyes, but silence was what healed hearts. What people needed most was not a thunderous sign, but a deep and steady quiet. What do you believe heals the heart? Loud miracles or the quiet power of stillness? At dawn, Elijah rose and continued on. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, but he no longer felt alone, for the Lord had whispered to him on Horeb, and that whisper had sealed itself upon his heart. With every step the seal grew deeper. Elijah knew his journey was not finished. In truth, it was only beginning. Have you ever felt that just when you thought the path had ended, God was preparing you for a new beginning? One day he met an old woman gathering bushes by the roadside. She was alone. Elijah helped her, and together they built a small fire. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Elijah smiled, "Because the Lord spoke to me in silence, and that silence taught me to carry the burdens of others." Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled back. In that moment, Elijah understood God's whisper was not meant for him alone. It was meant to reach every soul he encountered. Every word he spoke was no longer his own. It was an echo of that silence. Have you seen a life changed when you shared the lesson God first taught you in secret? What do you think truly heals the heart? Is it loud miracles or the quiet power of stillness? One afternoon, as Elijah wandered through the desert, the sky burned red. The horizon shimmered with mirages, but only one thought filled his mind: God's voice in the silence. That voice had become his companion. With every breath he felt the peace of a whisper, peace stronger than the fire that once fell on Carmel. At dawn, Elijah rose and pressed on. The desert stretched endlessly before him, yet he no longer felt alone, for on Mount Horeb the Lord had whispered to him. That whisper was like a seal upon his heart, and with every step it sank deeper within him. Elijah knew God's plan was not finished. In truth, the real journey was only beginning. Have you ever felt that when you thought your path was ending, God was preparing you for a new beginning? Days passed, and Elijah walked the barren road, reflecting on his past. The triumph at Carmel, the silence at Horeb, the threat of Jezebel, all of it formed a single story. He began to see that God's presence was not only revealed in moments of wonder, but also in fear, in weariness, in the quiet stretches of life. The deepest lessons were born in the softest whispers. One evening Elijah fell to his knees and prayed, "Lord, I have heard you in the whisper. You are mighty, even in silence. Do not let me stray from you." It was not a cry shouted to the heavens, but a quiet plea from the depths of his heart. And you, when you pray, do you find yourself crying out loud, or do you seek him in the silence? As Elijah journeyed on beneath the red sky, walking through shifting images on the horizon, one truth remained unshaken. God's voice in the silence was his strength, his peace, and his guide. Do you think true peace is found after great victories, or in the quietest of moments? When night fell, Elijah rested beneath the starlight. As he laid his weary body on the ground, the heaviness in his heart lifted, for in a gentle whisper, God had taught him, "My strength is in silence." Elijah understood that miracles may open eyes, but it is silence that heals hearts. What the people longed for was not thunder or noise, but a deep, steady stillness. So let me ask you, what do you think truly heals the heart, loud wonders, or the quiet power of peace? When morning came, Elijah rose and continued his journey. The desert stretched endlessly before him, yet loneliness no longer pressed upon him, for the Lord had whispered to him at Horeb, and that whisper remained like a seal upon his heart. With each step that seal grew stronger. Elijah knew God's plan was not finished. The real journey had only just begun. Have you ever felt that, just when you thought your path was ending, God was actually preparing a new beginning? Elijah remembered the mission placed in his hands, to go to Damascus, to anoint kings, to choose Elisha. But first his soul had to be prepared. The lesson of Horeb was written deeply within him. Silence is the source of strength. From then on, every step he took became a prayer. As he walked, Elijah lifted his eyes to the heavens. Even in the spaces between the stars, he could see God's presence, and he realized silence is not an empty void, but a sacred space that God himself fills. Have you ever discovered that a moment you thought was empty was in truth filled with God? So I ask again, is peace found in mighty victories or in the quiet moments where God whispers to the heart? Have you ever felt that just when you thought you were at the start of the journey, God was already preparing another beginning? Elijah's path went on. The desert still burned beneath the sun. The road still stretched endlessly, yet his heart felt light. Silence had taught him something precious. No burden is ever carried alone. "You are not alone," whispered the voice of God. Now Elijah understood. The fire on Mount Carmel had stirred the people, but the silence on Mount Horeb had transformed him. That was where the true strength lay. Do miracles change societies, or is it the quiet transformation within a single heart that reshapes the world? One afternoon, as Elijah journeyed through the desert, the sky blazed red. Mirage-like images shimmered across the horizon, yet his mind held only one thought, God's voice in the silence. That voice had become his companion. With each breath he felt the peace of the whisper, a peace stronger than the fire of Carmel. Does true peace come in moments of triumph or in the quietest hours of life? When night fell, Elijah lay beneath the stars. His body was weary, but his heart was no longer heavy, for God had spoken gently, "My strength is in silence." Then Elijah knew, miracles open eyes, but silence heals hearts. What people needed most was not thunder or fire, but the stillness of God's presence. What do you believe heals hearts? The sound of miracles, or the quiet strength of sacred moments? At dawn, Elijah rose and walked on. The desert ahead remained long, yet he no longer felt alone, for the Lord had whispered to him on Horeb, and that whisper had sealed itself upon his heart. With each step, the seal pressed deeper. Elijah knew God's plan was not finished. The true journey had only just begun. Have you ever sensed that just when you thought you were at the beginning, God was already shaping a new beginning for you? This is what Elijah carried in his heart as he walked through the desert. His journey was not his alone. God had shaped him in silence, and now he was guiding him toward a new encounter. A name rose like an echo on the horizon, Elisha. Elijah knew their paths would cross. That meeting would open the door to a new era, one that would rise from the stillness. The lesson whispered on Mount Horeb was ready to be passed down, not as fading memory, but as a living legacy. For God's work never ends with one man. It always flows forward, finding a new heart prepared to carry it on. God's whisper does not come to condemn, but to call. Silence does not open to judge, but to heal. The gentle voice Elijah heard on the mountain told him, "Your journey is not over." And today that same voice speaks to our hearts. Your path is not finished. You only need to quiet the noise. Imagine it. Fire fell from heaven on Mount Carmel, and the people cried out, "The Lord is God." Yet soon after, in the stillness of the desert, Elijah encountered a whisper. Two extremes, flames from heaven and a delicate voice revealing the same truth. God does not always appear in thunder or noise. More often, he is found in silence, but we now live in an age of endless noise. Screens glow day and night, notifications pulse like alarms to our hearts. The first thing we reach for in the morning is not prayer but a device. The day passes in a blur of social media streams, email alerts, and the constant hum of the city. And without even noticing, we may lose the ability to hear God's whisper. So here is the question: what is the greatest challenge of our time? Are we battling idols on the mountain, or are we bowing to the glowing screens in our hands? I'd love for you to share in the comments, my modern idol, because perhaps idolatry has simply changed its mask. The whisper Elijah heard in the cave restored his spirit. But what voices echo in our modern caves, through our headphones, on our screens, in the noise we invite into our lives? Do we run from silence, or do we dare to meet God there? The clamor of the world fills not just our ears, but our very souls. Yet God still chooses to speak in quiet moments. Modern life has made us restless, afraid of silence, because silence reveals the emptiness within. But perhaps it is exactly there, in that emptiness, that God's tender whisper waits for us. Take a moment and think. When the phone is switched off, when the headphones come off, when the outside noise fades, what voice do you hear? Is it the echo of your own fears or the steady breath of God? Elijah's test in the cave is still ours today. For the whisper of God can only be heard when we quiet our own noise. The endless hum of modern life binds us with invisible chains. On the surface we seem free, yet deep inside we are captive to other voices. The whisper Elijah heard in the cave reminded him of who he truly was. We too rediscover our identity, not in the glow of screens, but in the depth of silence. Perhaps the greatest miracle is not fire falling from heaven, but peace rising in a quiet heart. Have you known such a moment? Have you felt God's touch in the sudden silence that breaks through the chaos of a crowd? Share your story in the comments, because these questions belong to you as much as they belong to Elijah. Now picture a morning in the city, brakes screeching in the subway tunnel, strangers brushing shoulders in the crowd, phones clenched in tired hands. We all carry our own little caves in our pockets. The ping of notifications is louder than the wind in Elijah's cave. The white light of our screens burns hotter than the desert sun. Every image we consume leaves an invisible echo in our souls, and at the end of the day we wonder, why can't I hear God's voice? Maybe we can, but the noise buries it. To modern ears, silence feels like a prison cell. Yet each of us is tested on our own Carmel, hushed in our own cave, and pressed forward into our own journey. God's whisper can guide us now, just as it guided Elijah then. The real question is, are we willing to hear it? Because beyond this silence, a prayer is waiting. Born out of Elijah's struggle, it is a prayer for the broken-hearted, a prayer that lifts our loneliness into the presence of God. And through that prayer, a new door opens. How do we step through? With small, concrete acts. Just 5 minutes each day. Switch the phone to flight mode, close your eyes, and rest in your breath. Whisper a single prayer. Lord, quiet the noise within me. Don't chase miracles outside. Make space inside. For sometimes the miracle is not fire from heaven, but calm in the heart. It wasn't the roar of the crowd that lifted Elijah, but the weight of a single word. Now I want to invite you to make a choice. Write it in the comments, 10 minutes of silence each day, or 1 sentence in a daily prayer journal. Both are simple, yet both open a real space within your soul. This is more than a suggestion for a habit. It is the first step toward facing your own Mount Carmel. Remember this, God's voice often lingers beside us before it speaks. Silence is the chair of his presence. For a while you say nothing, then a single sentence comes, heavy but healing. That one sentence doesn't just change your day, it shifts your direction. Perhaps what you've been longing for is not a new miracle, but the quieting of old noise. So think again, how can you bring Elijah's solitude in the cave into your own life? You may never have a cave on a mountainside, but when you turn off the lights in your room, when you put your phone away, you can find your own cave. And there in that stillness, you may hear the whisper that makes your heart tremble. For the same whisper that lifted Elijah then, can lift you now. Picture this, you're alone in your room at the end of the day. The lights are off, a soft breeze drifts through the window, your phone rests on the table, your headphones are unplugged. The silence you hear in that moment is not emptiness, it's an invitation that God whispers into your soul. Maybe it's just one sentence, "Do not be afraid, I am here." And that single sentence can be as powerful as fire from heaven, because miracles begin where the heart dares to listen. The most important way to hear this call is to make silence a rhythm of your life. Silence is not an escape, it is a meeting. When you step away from the noise, you are not alone, you are stepping into God's presence. Elijah's cave was not only a refuge, it was a meeting place. And today your meeting place might be a room, a quiet park bench, a morning walk. Wherever it is, God is already waiting for you. And do not think you need perfect silence to hear his whisper. God's voice is not bound to flawless conditions, it rests in the honesty of your heart's stillness. So let go of excuses. Don't say, "My home is crowded, my job is busy, I don't have time." Even 1 minute of silence can open a window in your heart, and the light that streams through that window can change the course of your life. That is why Elijah's story is not just an ancient tale, but a living guide. The path from fire on the mountain, to silence in the cave, to a prophet rising again, that journey is a mirror of our own. And perhaps today it can become the mirror of yours. This choice marks the beginning of your journey. Let us pray together. Lord, quiet the noise in my mind. Give me courage to begin again. I am broken but not without hope, weary but not defeated. When you call, I will rise, even if only with small steps. Show me the gift hidden in solitude, to rest in you, to find shelter in you, to gather strength in you. And if your heart whispers yes, place your hand over your chest and say, "Today, I will wait for your voice." Because sometimes the greatest transformation begins with just one sentence. It was true for Elijah, and it can be true for you. Close your eyes for a moment. In the stillness, the only sound you hear is your own heartbeat. In that same silence, beneath the shade of a broom bush, Elijah listened to the cry of his soul. It was in that moment he realized, there is no escaping God, for he is present not only in the noise, but also in the deepest loneliness. The desert's silence. In those whispers Elijah heard, what remains with us is prayer. Because sometimes even miracles are not enough. The heart still breaks, the soul still grows weary. And in that place, the greatest gift God has given the human heart is prayer. It is not just Elijah's prayer, it is ours too. The cry of broken hearts and tired souls. Imagine yourself there, alone in the desert, under the broom bush, the words from your lips blending with Elijah's. "Lord, I am weak, my strength is gone, my loneliness is heavy, my heart is broken, but your whisper is enough for me. By your word I want to rise again." Have you ever prayed like that? Have there been moments when words failed and only tears remained? Share it in the comments. Yes, I have prayed, or I'm not there yet. Your response could be the light that guides someone else's path. Now in this chapter, we enter a long prayer together. Words become the bridge, carrying us past exhaustion into the quiet but powerful breath of God's grace. A prayer for the broken-hearted is one of the most powerful prayers, because God does not only hear the loud cries of victory, he hears the quietest tears. When Elijah said, "Enough is enough, Lord," it sounded like despair, but in truth it was the beginning of surrender. So it is with us. When our hearts are broken, they are open to receive even more light. Think for a moment, where are the broken places in your life? What dream has fallen apart? What relationship, what hope has shattered? It is in those very places that God can touch the deepest. Because one of his greatest joys is to mend what has been broken. A prayer in such a moment may not change the world, but it can rebuild your heart. And maybe, just maybe, God's miracle will take root right in the rubble of your life. Pause for a moment. Feel the weight on your shoulders. Listen to the steady rhythm in your chest. Outside, the world is restless, notifications, news, endless noise. But here, right now, there is a silence, as soft as a desert wind. In that silence, a door opens, and from its threshold rises a single prayer, born from all the hours of loneliness. "My Lord, when I have no strength, be my strength. When I cannot see the road ahead, let your whisper guide me. Lift the stones from my heart with your hands. Pour your light into my broken places." Sometimes a miracle isn't fire falling from the sky. Sometimes it's simply a trembling heart finally finding peace at dawn. Victory isn't always in the roar before a crowd, but in a single whispered amen on weary knees alone in a closed room. This is what Elijah learned, to follow the whisper, not the noise. Now I ask you two simple but profound questions. Where do you hear God more in your life, in the storm or in the silence? Write your answer in the comments. Just one word, whisper or fire, and if you like, add why. Let's turn to another step in the journey of prayer, because sometimes the hardest prayer is the one for our own hearts. It is easy to pray for others, but to expose our own brokenness, our own failures before God, that takes courage. Elijah himself admitted not only the sins of the people, but also his own weakness, for true strength begins where the masks fall. So let us pray. Lord, I have feared my own shadows. I have run, I have hidden, I have forgotten, but you did not forget. Now I bring every shadow, every fear, every shame before you. Forgive me, renew me, teach me to walk in your light. And have you ever faced your own shadows in prayer? Share with us, yes I have, or no it's hard. Because honest words spoken from the heart are often the ones God answers the fastest. Remember, prayer is not a list of wishes. Prayer is the opening of the heart's door, wide and unguarded. Just as Elijah did in the desert, turning to God in the quiet, with nothing to hide. Their exhaustion becomes strength, brokenness becomes healing. And as we close, remember this: when prayer ends, a new beginning unfolds. That was Elijah's story, a man weary in the desert, lifted up by God's whisper. His prayer birthed a strength beyond himself, and ours can too. For every prayer we lift draws from the same endless source. Chapter 10 may end here, but the journey of faith does not. God's story is written again in every broken heart, and now a new page turns before us, the moment Elijah was taken up, when chariots of fire swept across the sky. In the next chapter, we'll uncover the mysteries of this divine departure and the legacy it left behind. Lord, I am not enough, Elijah whispered, but I have you. In his exhaustion, that confession became a spark, and within that spark was the fire that could rekindle the heart of a nation. Have you ever said those words yourself? I am not enough. Maybe in your work, maybe in your relationships, or maybe in the silence of your own struggles. If you have, write in the comments, yes I have. If not, write no, I never have. Because that simple confession is often where God's power begins. Let's continue together with these words. Lord, I am not enough, but you are my strength. Breathe when I am weary. Speak when I am silent. Lift me when I am broken. See my tears and make a new way in me. For I am weak, but you are strong. When I am lost, your light finds me. These words were Elijah's, but they can just as easily be yours. And maybe today they'll give you the courage you didn't expect to find. The story of Elijah is more than the life of a prophet. It's a mirror of the fractures within every human heart. We try to hide our brokenness, but God sees it, and it is there He chooses to touch us most deeply. Perhaps you too are waiting to rise from your brokenness, and in that moment, prayer becomes the wing that carries you. Pray like this: Lord, I do not hide my broken heart. I bring you my wounds. I lay before you what I have kept hidden from others. Heal me. Let your hands mend what is shattered. Let me see your strength in the midst of my weakness. Have you ever opened your brokenness to God? Share in the comments, yes I have, or no I hide it. Because sometimes one person's honesty sparks hope in another. Remember this: prayers from a broken heart may not seem to shake the heavens, but they open the very doors of heaven. Elijah discovered that God does not always speak in the thunder, but in a whisper. And maybe right now, He is answering a whisper that is rising within you. But there is more to learn. Sometimes God does not answer right away, because waiting is its own kind of teacher. Elijah waited for rain for 3 years, and in that waiting he learned to open the skies within himself. Perhaps you too are waiting today, longing for an answer, feeling the silence. But the silence is not empty. It is God preparing you. Pray like this: Lord, calm my restless heart. Teach me to wait. Teach me to listen in the silence. Give me patience when answers seem far away. Not my will, but yours be done, for your timing is always right. Now I ask you, what do you find harder in prayer, waiting or surrendering? Write in the comments, waiting or surrender. Your answer may be the strength someone else needs. And remember, God's silence is not His absence. It is His way of shaping you. This is what Elijah discovered in the whisper. God often hides His answer in the steady rhythm of a patient heart. There was both fear and hope within him. Elisha folded the cloak, just as his master once had, and struck the waters. The Jordan parted again, and he crossed on dry ground. From a distance, the company of prophets watched in awe. They whispered among themselves, "The spirit of Elijah rests on Elisha." To them, this moment was proof that God's power had not ended, it had simply passed on. Yet Elisha walked with a heart divided. Joy surged within him, for God had granted him the spirit of his master. But grief weighed heavily too, because Elijah was gone. It was a strange burden, an emptiness left by loss, mixed with the heavy call to carry on the work of one who had departed. Standing alone at the river's edge, Elisha gripped the cloak tightly. Elijah's scent still lingered in its folds, the dust of the road, the wind of the desert, the sweat of long journeys. As the roar of the Jordan filled his ears, he lifted the cloak once more and struck the waters. His cry broke the silence, "Where is the God of Elijah now?" And the river split, sharp as if cut by a sword. In that instant, Elisha understood. This was no mere inheritance in name. This was God's confirmation. The servant had changed, but the power remained. Time passed. Days turned to years. Elijah had walked his long path through storms and silences, fulfilling the mission of a prophet. But his end would not be an ordinary death. God had not called him to the grave, but to the skies. That day, Elijah set out with Elisha, two prophets walking side by side, one closing his journey, the other standing at the doorway of a new beginning. The wind rose heavy around them, carrying the weight of what was to come. Step by step, Elijah's heart grew lighter, for he knew this was not an ending, but a transfer of holy fire. When they reached the Jordan once more, the river raged and thundered. Elijah took his cloak, folded it, and struck the waters. Once again the river split, and together they crossed on dry ground. Elisha's eyes shone wide with wonder, for God's power still rested on his master. It was a final declaration. God was with Elijah to the very end. As they walked further, Elisha spoke, his voice trembling with both longing and courage. "Master, I ask for a double portion of your spirit." Elijah turned to him, eyes narrowed at the weight of the request. "You ask a hard thing," he said softly, "yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it shall be yours. Have you ever stood in such a place? Faced with the task of carrying someone else's legacy, shouldering their burden, stepping into the path they left behind? Perhaps you know the weight, or perhaps you are still waiting. Share your answer. I am carrying a legacy too, or not yet. For sometimes, God's plan is not the end of a story, but the passing of the flame from one life into the hands of another. At that very moment, a storm broke loose from the heavens. Horses of fire and a chariot of fire appeared, blazing with light. Flames encircled the place, and the sky darkened as though day had turned to night. Elisha's eyes widened, her heart pounding with both fear and awe. The chariot of fire rushed down and lifted Elijah away. In a single instant, death, the greatest fear of humankind, was transformed into glory in the hands of God. Elisha cried out, my father, the chariot and horsemen of Israel." Tears welled in his eyes, for the loss of a master was not merely a farewell, it was a call to step into an empty place. When Elijah ascended into heaven, only his cloak remained. Elisha stooped down, picked up the cloak, and felt its weight and strength settle in his heart. It was no mere fabric, it was a symbol of God's inheritance. The path Elijah had begun was now entrusted to Elisha. Perhaps you've had moments like this too. Someone's legacy, someone's words, or even someone's prayer may have fallen into your hands. The responsibility is heavy, but in it lies a strength you did not know you had. Have you ever wondered, what will my legacy be? And how will I carry it? Share your thoughts in the comments. My legacy, for maybe your legacy will light the way for someone else. Elisha draped the cloak over his shoulders and returned to the banks of the Jordan River. The disciples who lived nearby approached him and bowed in respect, but doubt still lingered in their eyes. For them, Elijah's ascension was a mystery too vast to grasp. Some longed to search the mountains for him, others simply marveled at what God had done. All who looked at Elisha's face were searching for an answer. If God is truly with this young prophet, how will we know? From a distance, the prophet community in Jericho watched. Wonder and reverence filled their faces as they whispered, "The spirit of Elijah rests upon Elisha." They ran to meet him, bowing before him, yet doubt still stirred in their hearts. What if the wind of the Lord carried him to some mountain or valley? They urged to send 50 strong men to search. Elisha answered quietly, firmly, "Do not send them." But their pleading did not cease. Their words pressed on, their eyes begged. At last Elisha sighed and said, "Go." For 3 days they searched. They climbed mountains and crossed valleys. The sun rose and set 3 times, but they found nothing. When they returned, Elisha met them with only this, "Did I not tell you?" This moment reveals the heart of inheritance itself. Some are content with God's silent confirmation, while others need to see proof with their own eyes. Which one are you? Comment: I trust in silent confirmation, or I don't rest until I see it myself. For sometimes faith speaks louder in silence than in signs. Elisha adjusted the cloak on his shoulders. Its weight carried warmth now, as if it had recognized its new owner. The wind tugged at its edges as he walked, whispering, "It is your turn." Elijah's footprints faded in the dust, but God's march continued in Elisha's steps. In that moment he knew, one era had closed and another had begun. The ascension of a man had become the renewal of a nation's hope, and so the greater question emerged. As Elijah's fire rose to heaven, in whose hearts on earth would that fire burn? In yours, in your children's, or perhaps in a stranger you've yet to meet? Heritage takes many forms. Sometimes it is a cloak, sometimes unseen courage, sometimes the warmth of a prayer still lingering in the air. Where will you place your cloak? On the Jordan, or on the flood of fear within you that you've carried for years but never let go? Elisha's journey was more than inheriting a prophet's role. It was to show God's presence to a watching people. And so they asked, each in their hearts, is God truly with him? The answer would not come in words, but in the echo of miracles. In every new city, in every encounter, Elisha's steps would speak. He was no longer merely Elijah's disciple, he was God's chosen messenger. And all eyes turned to him, the young prophet whose master had been taken to heaven. Have you ever found yourself in such a moment? A moment when every eye turns to you, and suddenly the weight of responsibility rests on your shoulders. Share in the comments, yes I have, or not yet. Because Elisha's story is more than history, it's a mirror of the burdens we will all face in life. As Elisha walked alone after Elijah's departure, the silence around him seemed to grow louder. The footsteps that once guided him were gone, yet God's presence was closer than ever. Their first stop, Jericho. Elisha's journey was not simply the path of a prophet, it was the rewriting of a nation's destiny. The fire Elijah left behind when he was taken to heaven was now alive in Elisha's heart. That fire became Israel's light in the darkness. What began with Elijah's ascension now continued with Elisha's steps. The chariot of fire had risen, but its flame still burned on earth, in miracles, in patience, in humility, in the quiet walk of faith. Through Elisha, the word of God had found a new voice. But what do you believe true inheritance is? A cloak, a prayer, or perhaps an invisible fire passed from one heart to another? Share in the comments. This is my inheritance. Your answer might be the spark someone else needs. Elijah's departure was not the end, but the beginning. God's story did not fade when the chariot disappeared into the heavens, and today, centuries later, that fire still burns. The question is, are you ready to carry it in your own heart? Perhaps this is the greatest call in Elijah's story. God's fire began with a prophet, spread to a people, and now waits to ignite your heart. Pray, reflect, share. How will God's legacy shine through your life? Though this chapter seems to close here, it is in truth a new beginning. Elijah's ascension, Elisha's walk, and your own calling are bound together in the same line of faith. Remember this as we end. God's fire never dies, it only seeks new hearts. Perhaps that heart is yours. Elisha adjusted his cloak as he walked through the dusty streets of Jericho, aware of every gaze upon him. In that moment he realized his legacy would not be measured only by miracles, but also by his attitude. His humility, patience, and trust in God spoke as powerfully as any wonder. Maybe you've been tested in the same way. People looking at you, silently asking, is God really with them? What do you say in such moments? Do you whisper, I'm just ordinary? Or do you stand firm and declare, God is with me? Share in the comments, because often the greatest miracle is not what others see, it's the quiet trust alive in your heart. From Jericho, Elisha walked on to Bethel. At the city gates, a group of young men mocked him, shouting, "Go up, bald head." The crowd laughed, trying to strip him of authority. Elisha did not answer in anger, but lifted his eyes in trust toward God's justice. And in that silence, everyone understood. Ridicule could not silence God's call. This moment marked Elisha's new role, not just as a man, but as the bearer of God's word. And what about you? When mockery comes your way, do you remain silent, or do you strike back in anger? Write in the comments, I trust silence, or I respond. Because sometimes the greatest strength is found in wordless resolve. Elisha left Bethel carrying mixed feelings. He had seen Elijah rise into heaven, yet his own journey demanded he face both honor and ridicule. This was the true weight of inheritance, to bear the glow of victory and also the sting of doubt. Step by step, the difference between an ordinary man and God's messenger became clear. In every village, in every town, new eyes turned to him. Some bowed in reverence, others tested him with mockery. But Elisha knew one thing: he no longer walked for himself. He walked for his people, with God's word on his lips and hope rising again in the hearts of many. The cloak Elijah left behind may have looked like simple fabric, but it carried the testimony of an age. When Elisha placed it on his shoulders, it was not just clothing, it was a burden, a calling. Every gust of wind, every whisper around him seemed to say, "It's your turn now." Have you ever felt that in your own life? The quiet voice that speaks when responsibility is placed in your hands. It's your turn now. How did you feel? Did you say, "I was ready"? Or did fear take hold? Share in the comments. Because sometimes God's call comes unexpectedly, and it always demands an answer. Let the fire that blazed at Elijah's ascension shine in our darkest nights. When we lose our way, may that flame guide us back, and let us proclaim each day with renewed strength, "The Lord is God." For his fire never dies. He is the Lord who shakes the heavens with fire and stills hearts with silence. Today we close this story, yet in truth we step into a beginning. In Elijah's miracles, in Elisha's footsteps, and in God's quiet whisper, we have seen reflections of our own lives. Now we turn to you, Lord. We open our hearts and seal this journey with prayer. Let us pray. O Lord, in our darkest moments we seek your light. Keep us humble in our victories and steadfast in our defeats. Your presence shines in chariots of fire, yet also rests in a single piece of bread in the wilderness. Open our eyes to recognize your touch in even the smallest miracles. Lord, touch the hearts of those who follow this prayer today. To the lonely, the weary, the fearful, may we bring hope, like the bread your angel placed before Elijah. Lift up the broken, comfort the tearful, whisper new beginnings to those who say, "I can't go on." Dear friends watching this video, I invite you now, open your hands, close your eyes and pray with me. Lord, give us strength to carry the legacy forward. A new chapter began when Elijah's cloak fell on Elisha's shoulders. Today your word has fallen to us. We offer you our hearts to keep that fire alive. May it burn within us, even as the chariots of fire rise into heaven. Lord, hear the prayers lifted now. Answer each heart in its own need. Work your miracles, both great and small. Do not leave us alone. And together we proclaim, "The Lord is God. The Lord is God." O Lord, we belong to you. Like the prophets who walked before us, we desire to bear your name. Be our strength when we falter, our words when we fall silent, our light when we lose our path. May your fire, like Elijah's, pass on through every generation. You sent your angel to Elijah with bread and water in the desert. Today we too walk in deserts of our own. Quench our thirst with your presence, feed our souls with your word. For man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from you. Teach us patience, Lord. Teach us to walk in your strength when days feel heavy, when roads grow long, when burdens weigh us down. Give us the courage Elisha felt when he took up the cloak. And in our weariness, whisper gently, "Now it is your turn." Lord, we lift our fears to you. Guide our steps through the unknown. Quiet our doubts and strengthen our faith. When the noise of the world overwhelms us, help us hear your whisper, stronger than any storm. Keep your fire burning in our hearts, O Lord. Surround us with your mercy. We thank you for every breath, every day you have given. Be courage in our fears, friendship in our loneliness, wisdom in our silence. With you, even the narrow path shines bright. Lord, give us lasting hope. Build unshakable peace within us amid dark news, storms and wars. Let peace be our gift to the world. Make our hearts your throne so no enemy may touch them. Let our lives shine as a light to those around us. Awaken our hearts, Lord, to those who suffer. Help us be a voice for the voiceless, strength for the fallen. Give us Elijah's courage, for in your kingdom no good deed is unseen, and no evil escapes your sight. Root us in your love, Lord. Replace pride with humility, anger with compassion, doubt with faith. May our hands heal as yours did. May our words comfort as yours whispered. Protect our families, O Lord. Give wisdom to children, direction to youth, peace to elders. Fill our homes with your presence. Let your abundance rest on our tables. May the fire of your name burn on in the generations after us. For your legacy never fades. Direct our paths, Lord, with holy purpose. Keep our hearts alive for your kingdom. Guide our steps in righteousness. Fix our eyes on your glory, that no storm may shake us. Fill us, Lord, with brotherly love. Give us unity of spirit, so that when we look at each other, we see your image. Let us sow peace, not division. May our voices rise together as one, proclaiming the Lord is God, the Lord is God. And now we close this prayer. Yet we know it is not an end, but a beginning. Elijah's mantle fell to Elisha. Elisha's mantle falls to us, and from us it will pass to the next generation. The fire will never go out. Lord, multiply it within our hearts. Amen. Thank you for joining us in this prayer. Along this journey, we have witnessed Elijah's fire, Elisha's legacy, and God's gentle whisper. Now it is your turn. Seal this prayer in your heart. Share it with those you love. Let it be a light in your life. Remember, God's fire never fades. It seeks new hearts. Perhaps one of them is yours. That is all for today. If this message touched you, please like this video, leave a comment and subscribe to our channel. Your participation helps spread this fire to many more hearts. Let us walk together, for this journey does not end here. And if you wish, you can also join our podcast, Veritas Deep Stories from the Bible, or move on to our next video.